team players, and welcome back to Trade Tuesday. We're so excited to get all of the fun information we have for you. Bob will be with us here shortly to jump in. And guys, this is just the greatest week to go and really make some big splash plays. We're going to be breaking down all kinds of different options in this episode. And as always, we're going to be going live at 3:45 each day. If you have a particular question that you want us to address live, put it in the chat before the episode starts. We know that a lot of you guys watch this at different times, well beyond it being live. Feel free to put your answer because we do go in the order that we receive the questions and the comments. Now, one of the big players in preparation for today that I really wanted to give people an edge, and you'll probably see me answer it a lot when we're going through the questions, is I believe the key target to go and get yourself a league championship right now is AJ Brown. And here is my entire reasoning behind it. First off, he's an absolute stud, and Philadelphia's offense is really, really lacking without him. The number two thing is that it's Philadelphia's bye week, so that he is at his absolute cheapest right now because there was a little bit of uncertainty. Is he coming back? Is he not? You don't get an injury report during the bye week as it is. So you have more uncertainty about AJ Brown out there than ever before. You know he's a stud. You know he's a dominant player. And if you have at least 2 wins going through the first 4 weeks here, to me, he's an absolute target to go out and grab and snag. So like I said, guys, we're absolutely ready for you guys to shoot in your questions here. I want to make sure that I didn't miss any here as we go through it, but that's the starting point for where we're at. Hitting up AJ Brown is one of the greatest things you can do to improve your team. So as we look at round the league here, there's a lot of players that last night gave us some greatness and didn't. And like I said, we really want to dive into that as we go. Adam shooting the first question at me here. Who should I rank and prioritize? So let me dive through these. Bigsby, Algier, Brown, Sermon. Of the players in their situation, I do believe that Algier is going to give you the best scenario. When we look at what Atlanta did so far this year as well as last year, Algier actually has some pretty decent standalone value by themselves. So, Adam, what I need to know from you is how many man league is this, and how much are you doing this with Fab or a priority waiver claim? Because that's going to alter the thinking of this a little bit in overall. But I would start with Algier as the number one answer to start with there. Then it would go Bigsby and Brown. And yes, I know we just saw Brown score 2 touchdowns last week and really start to churn it up. The issue is that when you look at Cincinnati, historically speaking, is that, especially given the fact you're a half PPR, is that they very much, under this coach, puts it into a receiving back and a runner. That's where you saw Mixon going crazy and Samaje Perine doing the receiving stuff. If you didn't watch that Bengals game this week, you see that he gets that rushing touchdown from a yard out. The reality of the way that went down is they gave it to Moss the play before. Moss got stuffed, and just natural tired player comes out. Brown just got lucky, and that the play call was in, and just went another one up to him. So when I go back to ranking it, I'm not as big on Brown as most, but that would be the quick ranking: Algier, Bigsby, and Brown. You guys are firing them in rapid fire. I love them. I see them all, guys. Ricky, welcome back. Money, it's been a while. I love you, my man. And we'll get down to you as well as Gusto, going through these in the order we are receiving at the top of the show here. If I can't get Fields off waivers, you got Hurts on the bye. Should you pick up Flacco in case Richardson's out? All right, KJ, here's the thing here, is that I do not believe Fields is going to be actually the starter here. Granted, every time Tomlin has said, as soon as as Russell Wilson is capable and ready, Russell Wilson is going to be the starter. He has said that from the absolute moment Justin Fields walked into the building. So I I don't want to go after Fields given that reality. And here's the other issue with Flacco here is that you're playing them. Maybe they start, maybe they don't game, and you need to have a starter on your team. So what I would prefer, KJ, is if you can let me know the other quarterbacks you have that are available in the waiver pool, and go from there. Because just from that list of Hurts or Fields or Flacco, you're kind of in a tough spot because there's no guarantee that either one's starting, despite the fact that Fields has started the first 4 weeks. Welcome back, Revan. I need a backup plan for JT, don't we all? So very similar to the last question. Without knowing the full extent of JT's injury, I don't know if I want to go down the backup route in Indy. I mean, that's the way it is. It is the safest replacement. I am much more comfortable going with Algier out of that group of 3. Again, Algier last year put up pretty good numbers standalone on a week-to-week basis. So you're not 100% dependent upon the injury. The second JT comes back, you're going to throw him back in your alignment anyway, and the handcuff isn't really going to matter. See, here's the thing with the Colts is that they basically just won 2 games that they didn't really should have won. I mean, if you watch that Chicago game, it was disgusting. The Colts versus Chicago 2 weeks ago. And Indy's offense had a nice little surge when Flacco first came in the game, but in the second half, they only put up 7 points. So do we really want to invest in a running game that is getting that kind of limitations? This week, they're playing Tennessee. That obviously helps. But we look at it forward. Miami's in a spot where, do you really want to? They're playing low-scoring games like crazy. And then after that, Indy is going to be going to Houston. So you got 2 division games with Miami smashed in the middle there. Again, I'm leaning Algier there as far as the answer, and the way that I would want to go with that, Revan. Welcome, Bob. Welcome to the party.
What's up?
Open up off the bat. Team Money and KG keeps shooting answers at you. KG, I'll keep since we're gonna finish up here. Waiver issues, Bob, for quarterbacks on bye. He specifically has Hurts. We're looking at either Dalton, Carr, Watson, and Daniel Jones are on his waiver list. You got a particular feeling about any of those 4?
Yeah, so as I said yesterday, I think how I feel about I feel like Andy Dalton is going to be a good play this week. I understand that Matt Stafford did struggle a bit in the game, but again, they ran the ball through Kyron, right? And so while I think Chuba could definitely do that, I think that the matchup is good enough for Andy Dalton on paper that he could have some success. I'm not saying that he's going to blow up for like 4 touchdowns or anything like that, but I do think that a 2-touchdown, 200-yard game is, what I think that Dalton could definitely get. Now, when it comes to Watson's problem, I feel, even though, we look at it and we compare this game to last week here with the Cardinals, is that Washington went up early, but the Cardinals, their coaching didn't really, let Kyler loose. It was more of a James Conner style thing here. So when I look at the Browns, Watson isn't playing particularly well.
No, and he's going to Philly, which doesn't really help.
Cooper is dropping a lot of passes and touchdown passes, right? And so it could very well be that this game for both the Browns and the Commanders here, that there could be a decent number of points scored, and Watson will be, could potentially also get 2 touchdowns and about 200 or so yards. When it comes down here to Carr, looking at Saints versus Chiefs, I'm not thrilled with that matchup at all for Carr. So I think that for me right now, I'm not really going out and searching for Carr. And same thing goes for Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, if we see that Malik Neighbors is healthy, maybe Daniel Jones will be a play. I really think that all of these quarterbacks, I think their ceiling realistically is about 2 touchdowns and 200 yards or so. So I think that I would pretty much
I apologize on the Cleveland one. I was reading the week 6.
no,
They're
I
going
would,
to Washington this week. So
yeah,
yeah, sorry about that.
I would pretty much go in this order. I would go Dalton, Jones if Neighbors is healthy, Watson and Carr in terms of like the matchups that I like. But again, with the Panthers, the reason why I'm kind of scooting my way over towards Andy Dalton more so is that the connection with Deontay Johnson is real, right? And with Xavier Legette being there, that's 2 pretty primetime kind of options in a matchup that they're probably going to have to. It's going to be a game that was on paper looks really weird, right? With both of these quarterbacks possibly eclipsing 200, 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. The running backs might do more like 80-ish yards on the ground apiece. I think the wild card here is Watson, to be honest with you, right, everybody? So, like, if Watson can connect and Cooper doesn't drop that ball, he's the guy that could get you those 2 touchdowns. But I don't realistically see that. And I don't really want to be a part of that. So I would do Dalton, Jones, Watson, Carr, and that'd be the order that I'd put it in. And Joe, what do you think about that?
I agree with that. I really believe Cleveland has the potential of being on the edge of imploding. And I mean like Cleveland, like old school Cleveland style imploding. Because as much as there have been some teams that have been bad, Cleveland is the best at it. And that's great. So,
I mean, over
RQ,
time, right?
welcome back. We see you down there, George. We're jumping over here to Ricky because we're coming down the list in order. I can't keep playing Pitts. We respect that. So I traded Najee and Kittle last night. Yeah, Ricky, I apologize. It might have been your trade that you were talking about directly, but almost a very similar one. If it wasn't yours, we were talking about was getting Kittle. In fact, it might have been this exact same trade we were talking about with you, Ricky. So yeah, I mean that's what we're talking about recommending. Kittle's in a spot where we know he's going to have some weeks where he blows up. We have him ranked very highly entering the season. We had him as a top 5 tight end. In a lot of cases over the summer, he was a top 3 tight end for PPR. And we look at this and goes, still looks like he's on pace to do it despite missing a week. So Pitts, you're right. There's no way around it. The entire Atlanta passing game is disappointed, especially if you were with the herd that was not us, that was on the team London. So, Ricky, can't say enough. That's awesome. Try to convert Pitts into something else. Good for you not having to include him in the trade. You got to use him as a little extra tag on to another trade. And as I started the show off, the number 1 player I'm going to be telling you guys to get all day and all week is Brown. It's his bye week. You're not going to get a medical update on him. People are sketchy about when he's ever coming back. This is the time to pick it up.
I don't think
playing him in week 7.
I'm out. No, I don't think that that's the case because from all the information that I've seen about Hollywood Brown,
No, AJ Brown. AJ Brown.
AJ Brown, yeah. AJ Brown's definitely a good piece to have. I think
because this is bye week. No updates, no everything.
We suggested a couple weeks ago after Kenny Walker went down that you should trade for Kenny Walker, and hopefully some of you were able to manage some of those trades because he did blow up last night. Unfortunately, we had a couple viewers yesterday who were hoping that Ken Walker would get under 7.5 points. But when it came down to it, he needed the touchdowns. And once he got rolling. And it was just a game, a game for the ages. It was a really interesting game, that game last night. But to this game.
And on that note, for those of you guys who watch it live, I told you Walker was going to give you a touchdown. Hopefully you guys hit that anytime TD bet because it paid well.
With your comment here, Ricky, Najee's one of those backs that, depending on the structure of your team, he's definitely a guy that heats up later on towards the end of the season. And so for me, for some instances in time, if he's bought for the right price, is definitely worth buying into. But when we look at Najee and getting you into George Kittle is fantastic because this tight end, what we've been dealing with tight ends recently has been just an utter garbage crapshoot, right? Like, we have some good performances, but like the top performance has been like 14, 15 points on any given week. And, the the guys that we thought would perform have not yet put up, except for Kittle last week, have not really put up that game. Brock Bowers 1 week. They haven't strung together 2 or 3 good games. And so I think once these injuries start subsiding and once the season starts to get rolling a little bit, we're going to see the cream of the crop kind of rise to the top with guys like Jake Ferguson, Travis Kelce now with the injury, looking at George Kittle. I'm a bit concerned, but not overly concerned about Dalton Kincaid. Definitely spreading the ball around more on games where Josh Allen's going to do more from a fantasy perspective. There is going to be more for Kincaid. I think a guy like Mark Andrews right now is worth dropping. I mean, I know we've been saying this for weeks and weeks and weeks, but he's definitely.
I still think you get to the form and trade value, though. I mean, his name does carry something.
He's
but
definitely
on Andrews, I want to point this out. This is one of the flaws that people get in fantasy football in general. And this is an important nugget to know, is that the vast majority of times when we're looking at who's going to be where, it's really about the slot that they're in within their team. And one thing that's been true about Baltimore is that their number 2 tight end does nothing. So likely stepped up last year whenever Andrews was hurt, and he was the number 1 who dressed that day because Andrews was on the IR. The fact that Baltimore's going through right now an identity crisis of who is their number 1 tight end is dramatically scary if you're on Team Andrews and he doesn't make that cut, because the average return in terms of a PPR league is less than 2.5 points a game for the number 2 tight end in Baltimore. So it's a very real chance that likely has and will pop over Andrews. The other thing that was really underreported that happened to Andrews is he was in a car accident, a literal car accident, not a figurative on the field one, but a literal car accident during training camp. And that isn't, everyone's ever been in a car accident when you're in your 30s. It can take a day or two to get recovered, in some cases much, much longer. So I bring that up to say that there's still name cachet on Andrews, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily going to be the greatest thing in the world. Guys, we love you guys.
So,
keep giving the follow-up questions, and we're going to hit all of you coming through. Team Money.
You, Ricky, Patrick, we see you. Revan, RGQ, we see you. Z Money, we see you as well. We'll get to all your questions. And I do want to touch on this right here for RGQ in a moment, that 0 and 4, because that's something to definitely
We're going to fix that. Team Money. Okay, so 10-man PPR. Love it. So what are we looking to do here, Bob?
So as I see from it, Team Money here, 10-man PPR, Burrow, Jacobs, Connor, CD, Chase, Kincaid, DK, JMO, Ford. For me, right now, I think your team is super solid going forward here. When we look at the performances for the weeks ahead, right? CD and Chase, as we've communicated, are going to have some good games coming down the pipeline. There are going to be games against the Steelers where Chase might struggle against Porter. There are going to be some games down the pipeline for CD that might not be the very best of matchups for CD. But again, when it comes down to it, these two are the cream of the crop, right? In terms of CD is going to be covered by Porter this week. So maybe we're not going to get a great game out of CD, maybe more of a realistic kind of like 60 yards, maybe a touchdown, depending upon the great game script here. He's going to be shadowed in Detroit by Carlton Davis. We saw that out of DK Metcalf. Against San Francisco, I think he'll be fine. Against Atlanta, I think he'll be fine. Against Philly, he'll be fine. Coming down in the playoffs here, you got a really nice playoff schedule for CeeDee Lamb. So I'm not worried about him. He's actually a guy right now that I would try to trade into. If I have the assets to trade into CeeDee Lamb, I'm definitely trying to trade into CeeDee Lamb. As it goes with Jamar here, Jamar, like I said, is definitely going to have to play. The Steelers, and that's going to be tough. But again, over the next couple weeks, he has Baltimore, the Giants, Cleveland, Philly, and the Raiders. That's going to be really nice. Really, really nice for Jamar. So I think you're settled on your top two. And with a guy like DK, we saw last night.
DK is great flex.
We saw that last night. DK was, Carlton Davis had him pretty locked up for most of that game. But DK was just bodying people after
he doesn't do it to anyone.
And so I think that that's super solid. JMO turned up one up the field the other day. That was a beautiful touchdown that he had. But for him, it is more like that boom bust. He was getting a lot of those targets earlier in the season, which is great. And when we look at the long-term value of Jameson Williams, he is one of those pieces that if you can trade him to upgrade to a CeeDee Lamb or to upgrade to a higher value kind of caliber long-term season hold, like a Jefferson or an Evans or a Reed, I would do it. But he definitely has a lot of value. Out of all your players on this team, your wide receivers are the strongest, knowing that you have Worthy, Wicks, Downs if Flacco's there, J-Mo, Kincaid, CD, and Chase. Your running backs, on the other hand, bye weeks are going to be a little bit tricky, I think. But I think, honestly, I'd stand pat. If I were to do anything, I think I'd stay pat. But if you wanted to do anything, the two guys that I'd probably pair together right now would be Connor and Ford. I would try to move Connor. And the reason being is that, he's getting a lot of usage. Even in the game where they were down by a bunch, the coach just wanted to run Connor basically into the ground. And eventually, over the course of the season, they are going to run him into the ground. And if that happens when Jacobs is on your bye and Brooks ends up not being the guy, I would like to have another, certifiable kind of running back. So what I would try to do is I would try to finagle a trade, try to move into Brian Robinson Jr. He's been having great usage, even though, Jane Daniels is there to potentially steal some carries. I think this is a good time to also think about trying to pick up a guy like Tank Bigsby. This is your last chance, I think, to buy Bucky Irving at a decent price. I think it's okay to also move and try to maybe go out there and get a Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, remembering that his injury happened early in the season. If a re-injury doesn't happen, you're setting yourself up with a guy who is slated to get over 15 to 20 carries a game, and they're going to be good carries. So for me, those are kind of the guys that I would go after with what you have. And I might even think about, trying to maybe finagle my way. Again, Ken Walker's a player where, he just broke out for 3 touchdowns. Most likely he might get hurt again this year. He's probably not going to get 3 touchdowns again this year. So I wouldn't buy him right now. I would also, here's a nice name. It's not a name that looks sexy on paper, but he's getting a decent amount of usage in games, and that's Justice Hill. If Derrick Henry were to the magnificent beast that he is,
well, that's not the replacement. Justice Hill's just a straight third down back,
right?
Because Henry can't pass block.
But I'm saying he's also an additional piece that's nice to have, especially for bye weeks. So, if I wanted to move up, I would trade Connor and Ford and try to move up into a higher caliber kind of long-term, less injury worries than Connor. But like I said, I think that right now you have a solid starting lineup, and maybe you worry about Chase Brown, maybe you worry about Downs, but I think what you have is a solid lineup, and I would hold this week unless I'm trying to really, really upgrade.
See, Team Money, I'm going to give you a completely different direction here. Because first off, I want to hold Connor until the legs run off because his usage is for real. And Jacobs is another old guy that could fall apart. You have 2 guys here that you can sell at pretty peak value. Because Chase Brown's probably never getting another 2 touchdown game again. So I want to move him right now at peak. And we've been saying for a while that, J-Mo is an all or nothing type, and he's not busting your lineup anyway, even as the flex. So having an all or nothing type, you use them best when you can capitalize them for something much more stable. Beginning of the year when he was slow, we kept saying, get on Henry, get on Henry. You can't afford Henry now. Henry's unbuyable right now. Mixon's a good answer to go for, but the one that the system is saying look for down the road, probably can actually afford him right now, is Cook in Buffalo. You should be able to turn Brown and J-Mo into that trade. And then whenever Connor does eventually get hurt, you don't have to worry about Brooks being there. You also have Ford for some injury, which, by the way, we're not huge on Ford either, but he's not going to get you the type of return that Chase Brown will. And this is the absolute peak of what you're going to be able to get for Chase Brown out there. So, guys, we see you shooting out a lot of great questions. George will be hitting you up here quickly. Ricky, love to keep follow up. And Dark Side, welcome to the party. We love how you keep jumping
and we
in there.
see you
and
at
we'll
Use
be
as well.
with you guys down the line.
Well. One thing I will say about James Cook, though, I'm really high on James Cook. 239-yard rushing performances, not great, but coming down the pipeline, Houston and the Jets might be a decently tough matchups in terms of the rush game. But week 17, he has the Jets. He has the Jets again. We'll see what happens there. But again, I think that if you're going to buy James Cook, the time to buy James Cook is now. Again, like I said, coming up after that Tennessee, Seattle, Miami, we just saw Miami get gashed by Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. We just saw Seattle get gashed by Gibbs and Montgomery. So if you are buying into James Cook, you need to buy right now.
That's right. And I think you can do it with Chase Brown and JMO. I think that's doable. Jay, welcome to the party. I believe it's the first time I've seen your face here. Do I trade DK and Ridley for Ayuk, McBride, and Waddle? I'm 100% taking that for a couple reasons. Ayuk's higher than any of the other players we have in the draft. McBride is someone with stability here at a really weird tight end position through 4 weeks. And, Waddle, right now, he's probably a stash. You're not going to feel a whole bunch of confidence here. But again, as I said this before about Miami, and I've seen no indications to say that it's not true, this entire regime down there is dependent upon getting into the playoffs or they're all going to lose their gig. If you're the smartest man on the planet and you can barely get 10 points a game, that doesn't add up to coming back to work next year. So Waddle and the entire passing game of Miami is going to figure something out. The guy who I think is going to actually make it, which, again, I wouldn't be trading significant assets for this guy, but I would want to go pick him up, is Mostert. I do believe when Mostert comes back, he's going to be like the missing piece that at least gives a little bit of juice. Maybe they get to 19 points a game on average down there in Miami. So I do think there is brightness for Miami's passing game to loosen up a little bit and start giving some goodness. I think Mostert will be the key to it. But absolutely, just looking at that with taking Waddle off of the trade, Ayuk and McBride for Ridley and DK all day, and you're giving me Waddle too. Slam dunk, Jay. Do that all day. I don't even know how you get a guy to accept that.
How I fall on this is very similar. After a couple poor performances in a row, I do start to get a big concern about Ayuk. But the targets, five targets through 3 games, or 5 targets in 3 games, and then 10 targets in week 3. The targets are there. Eventually, I feel like he is going to put it together. But also, we have to remember that Brandon Ayuk is this type of player anyway. There are games last year where he just didn't do anything. I mean, I had him last year, and I think he had 1 catch for like 10 yards one time, and then 1 catch for 10 yards and a touchdown. And the touchdown basically saved.
And then he'll give you 46 next week.
DK is
that's how the Niners are.
DK is an absolute stud. But what we also need to understand is that at some point this year, Miami's going to have to. The game yesterday was atrocious, and Miami's going to eventually have to either realize that Tua is not coming back and go after a quarterback if they want to stay competitive, or they're going to have to just wait for Tua until week 8, and then Waddle will be all right, Tyreek will be all right, and all that stuff. So I think, like Joe said, sitting on Waddle is nice. And this trade just feels like DK for Ayuk and McBride. And I think that right now is pretty fair. DK has been performing basically out of his mind. He's an absolute dog. And for me, I always want to trade into DK. But I can understand he, as 3 games in a row over 100 yards. Then he gets the Giants, San Francisco, and Atlanta next. I mean, I think that he's just going to continue doing that, if not just get like 80 yards at a time. So I do think the value you're getting back in return to also dump Ridley, because Ridley's one of those players where, he has one big game and we're all on Ridley's good side again. And then, two bad games in a row. So you're buying low on Ayuk. You're buying low on McBride.
Yeah,
And
he's not worth the roller coaster.
So I think you're getting enough back. The question is, you also would be dumping somebody because you're getting a 3 for 2. So as long as that person's that you're dumping is worth dumping, I think this is a fair enough trade, Jay.
Alrighty, jumping down the list here. Should I trade Worthy for DJ Moore? Guys, I wish I could have a billboard that would be on here constantly. Do not invest in Chicago receivers. Caleb Williams sucks. Do not invest in anyone that's required to get the ball from Caleb Williams. So no, do not trade the now number 1 with the best quarterback in the league for a quarterback who can't even get the ball, and it hasn't even gotten started to get winding yet. Guys, just wait until this weather turns. Darkside, I know you're here. Just love how much Caleb Williams is going to fall apart to all of it out there.
As I see,
and then follow up T-Money. Bob kind of hit upon having Hill. I wouldn't move Worthy and JMO for Hill. I think that's way too much for Hill.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, T-Money, that a guy like Worthy, if I'm moving Worthy, you have the right kind of strategy there. I think the right strategy is to target one of those high profile guys that have the chance to come back and get you that 30 points.
Wait, time in my head, I heard Justice Hill. Is that Tyreek Hill? Because if it's Tyreek, I would do it.
That's Tyreek. So,
sorry, my bad.
Where I kind of see this is that I love the idea right now of Tyreek, but what we saw out of Huntley, we were hoping a quarterback change to Huntley would be better. It was not. We were hoping that a quarterback change, from Skyler to Huntley would be good. It wasn't. So right now, where I see it at is that Worthy and JMO right now are putting up valuable points on your bench for the most part. Looking at it here, you have them, and one of them is either in your back end second flex or they're on your bench. So you're trying to move up. And I understand the idea of moving up into Hill and trimming the fat when it comes down to it. I don't know if Hill's the guy I would move into right now.
Oh, dude, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. For all the reasons you said about Miami's offense, I want Tyreek.
Listen, right now with these players, with the 2 players you're giving up, moving into Hill.
But they both were on his bench.
I understand that. I get that. But what I'm going to try to suggest to you is these 2 players are playing good enough right now that you could probably trade them into Nico Collins.
There you go. That works too. You just like Nico more than Tyreek. That's just a fundamental fact.
It's not that I love Nico more than Tyreek. It's that right now, as it stands, Nico has a quarterback who's able to connect with him. Hill, for me, is still worth trading for. Like we said yesterday, Hill is still worth trading for. But the 2 pieces you're giving up to trade into him, I think could probably burn you sooner in a matchup than, dealing with what you're dealing with, right? When I see your team, you're still starting DK in that flex position right now, and you're trying to upgrade either that second flex or whatnot. But right now, Hill, while he will be able to upgrade in the future by week 8, week 9, most likely, I think that Nico Collins is an upgrade now and in week 7, week 8, week 9, week 10. And
that's true. I mean, there's less risk on Collins.
The 2 guys that you're offering, I think, are a good start to get you into a Nico. They might not be accepted, but it's a good start worth trying first to do that. That's how I feel. And I definitely wouldn't trade
reasonable
Worthy
conversation to have.
I definitely wouldn't trade Worthy into DJ Moore. Worthy has too much upside to trade into him. We see you, Javier. I see that comment, Darkside. Let's just touch on this really quickly.
All right, touch on it, baby.
Have your fun now.
Have my fun now. I'm going to have my fun forever because Caleb Hills is not going to be doing anything.
T-Money, I see that. The guy who has Nico.
Painting his nails on the IRs. What is he doing?
So yeah, I can see that wouldn't happen then. So yeah, I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
fair. I think it's fair then to go out there and get a guy like Hill, even going after a guy like Justin Jefferson too. Those are two guys that are going to be pretty hard to get. And even a guy, if you don't want to trade your load for that, go after a guy like Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed, we were telling you to go after Jaden Reed before last week. He had a big game, so he's going to be hard to buy now, I think. But again, guys like that are definitely worth it for me. And Hill will be worth it, but I think that it's just going to have a lot more growing pains coming with it.
And Dark Side, on that point there, I'm willing to cut $1,000 check right now that Penix ends up with more career wins than Caleb Williams.
That's gonna be a couple years down the line, but that's Joe's money right there.
I'm willing to put that out there.
Augusto, my running backs are Hall, Kamara, Ford, Dobbins. My wide receivers are London, Rice, Neighbors, Godwin, Pittman, Deontay, and Bowers. Would you do Pittman for Ford, for Pittman and Ford for Higgins, or for a running back?
Bob, you want to start with this or mine?
So here's kind of the long and short of it, Augusto, is that with Anthony Richardson, Pittman's not worth owning. With Joe Flacco, Pittman is worth owning. Mm-hmm. So in order to shine light on this situation, we really need to know about this injury designation a little bit more. If it's said that Richardson is going to miss time, especially knowing that you have Rashee Rice being injured as well, I think that for me right now, you're probably starting a combination of Neighbors, Godwin, and Deontay Johnson this week, most likely as your top three wide receivers. But as I see it, and Pittman could be an asset if Flacco plays. The long and short of it there. Mm-hmm. As it goes to with Ford, I think that if you're trading out of Ford doesn't have a super lot of value. He's a back end piece right now. Getting taken out of games, not getting enough yardage. He's definitely a really low floor, low ceiling type of player right now. And not many people want to take him on unless they're suffering through bye week help. So Higgins, on the other hand here, is tied to an offense that once they get their feet under them after all this offseason stuff, Higgins could be a valuable piece. But like Joe said the other day, when you look at Higgins, he's one injury more away from just saying, hey guys, I'm not even going to play this season. So I don't want to trade into Higgins. If I'm trading Pittman and Ford after Pittman's good game right here, you might have to move this up into Pittman and Dobbins for a guy like Jaden Reed if you want to have some health on that back end in terms of the wide receiver room. I think that a piece that might be even just a straight up worth it trade would be a Ford for Wan'Dale Robinson. I really like the value of Wan'Dale Robinson moving forward. I know that sounds really weird for somebody to say. I think I think that if you're trying to get a running back, which you need if you trade a running back, because going in the rest of the season with just Hall, Kamara, and Dobbins could be a little bit dicey with situations. I think that a guy that I would be targeting this week, especially after having two good games in the last 4 games, would be Brian Robinson Jr. I think he's a must target for a lot of people.
He's a great RB2.
Hey, all-in-one, we see you. Javier, we definitely see you. We'll also get to all those questions. I think that when it comes down to it, Joe Mixon is also kind of the buy right now, is that if I'm going after a running back, I think
Ford for Mixon would be fair.
Well, no, you can't do just Ford for Mixon. You have to do Ford and Pittman for Mixon, something like that.
I think you could. But I guess I'd actually go the other direction. You have Kamara at his absolute absurd peak. I believe he's running back number 1 right now in terms of value, and he is not going to maintain that. So if you have someone who's in your league who's short a receiver, and they have one of the elite studs, Gibbs, Saquon, someone like that, I would not be afraid to do either Pittman or Deontay, because both Pittman and Deontay are, from fantasy perspective, the same guy. If they have the backup quarterback in, they will get a ton of catches. Maybe they'll get in the end zone. Otherwise, you're just really hoping the starter doesn't get back on the field, which should be a newsflash to both of those franchises. Your quarterback's not good enough. But that's a side story.
Yeah,
So I would move either Kamara and either Deontay or Pittman, dealer's choice on which one's game you personally like watching more. I would say you're probably better keeping Deontay than Pittman. But that's just me choosing one over the other. But if you can move Kamara and Pittman and get an elite stud running back, I think that's maximizing where your team's value is at and where they're at. Because I don't believe Kamara is going to keep it as high. I don't really see that you ever going to play forward when it comes push to shove. Because even during bye time, we're going to put Dobbins in. So go upgrade out of Kamara. Go put yourself there because New Orleans isn't going to stay this hot. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, and you might even, again, with volume and things like that, you might be able to also try to move into a Kyron, and you could try to move into a Derrick Henry as well.
Like I said, one of the stud backs. And which stud back it is kind of doesn't matter as long as it's one you already love.
Because, again, it's about optimizing your starting lineup here is that these back-end pieces are great for bye weeks. They're great for when injuries happen, like we've suffered throughout the majority of this season so far. Another guy to put on your radar if nobody's going after it. And this guy, it's a guy that continues to fly under the radar, flew under the radar this past week, and continues to perform really well and being given a decent amount or a lot of carries, is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones, his next 4 games. Again, everybody, if you want a running back right now, Aaron Jones is one of those guys to kind of go after. Looking at his schedule, you have the Jets, whose run defense is You have Detroit, who just got beat by Ken Walker coming back from an injury. You have, and that was in catch-up mode too, so that's not even an excuse. Detroit did have the best run defense out there until this past week, so
Seattle could run the ball, guys. That's going to be a hard team to beat.
You have the Rams, and you have Indy, and then the Jags. So that's the next 5 games. Minnesota looks hot.
They are.
And here's the thing. He's getting the receptions as well, and he's only got 2 touchdowns. With that amount of volume that he's getting, those touchdowns are going to come.
Yes, they are.
If you're looking for a running back, you could totally today, right now, move something along the lines of Pittman and Ford and move yourself into an Aaron Jones if somebody wants to get on Pittman. Or you can move Deontay and Ford and maybe a back-end piece on the back end to move into Aaron Jones. I think he's worth moving into right now. I really do.
And the other one is since you're trying to upgrade out of Rice, is you could do London for A.J. Brown, knowing the speculation around there. And that's another move I believe would give you a much better run to win your league. Moving London for A.J. Brown, or maybe even Deontay and one of your back end pieces for it. Like I said, A.J. Brown is someone that people are down on, but really should be on your buy list now. I can't say it enough.
Let's think about this, Joe, because this ties into a couple other things that I've been seeing. Is that, to be honest with you, you could probably move London and move into Aaron Jones or Cook plus the JSN. I'm just spitballing here. People love.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways you do it because, like I said, you got to get over part of that Rice hurdle.
I would be ready. I'd be ready to move on from that. So I traded Najee, Revin, and JMO for JSN and Dobbins. I think it's a fair deal.
I like that.
When I look at these things, you've got 2 young wide receivers who are getting a good amount of usage. With JMO, you get that big play potential. With JSN, you're getting just a decent target share among these wide receivers. When it comes to these running backs, again, the schedule for Dobbins is killer right now. With the injuries to the offensive line, it's just killer. And Najee always ends up trying to heat up towards the back half of the season. That's the thing that Najee seems to have done the last 2 years of his career. When I look at Dobbins, I say, okay, I still do think that Dobbins is going to end up really high at the end of the season in terms of overall rankings, right? But I think this is a fair deal. I don't know if it moves the needle. I definitely don't know if it moves the needle.
Oh, it definitely makes it easier to click the boxes because JSN's such a stabler force.
It doesn't move the needle for me in the short term, but I think over the long term, it definitely does move the needle for me.
Mhm.
Because when I look at this, I see Denver, I see Arizona. Arizona just got beat by, with by Brian Robinson. You have Cleveland on the schedule. Then that back half of the schedule looks really nice for J.K. Dobbins. It looks like a really nice back half of the schedule. So I think that was a really smart trade for the long haul of the season. I think they're going to have tremendous value over the long term of the season, and the schedules for Dobbins does get better, and the schedule for JSN is what it is, But that's kind of how I fall on that, Revin. George, Gibbs is a dog.
George, love to hear it. Like we said yesterday, as long as Seattle scores, you're going to win, and that's what happened.
Hey, Mr. Grapefruit. Gibbs is definitely a dog. For those of you that traded for him, beautiful. For those of you that traded out of him to get into something even better, Gibbs is going to have these games where he gets those 2 touchdowns. Still hasn't really eclipsed that 100-yard mark rushing, but we really aren't expecting that. This game yesterday was a great way to see the top ceiling of the Lions. It really was. I mean, you look at this. Goff went 18 for 18. One of those plays got called back by an interception, so he would have had one incompletion, but that was called back. This was what the Lions do best: run the ball, just try to choke people out by running it, and then if you start getting points scored against you, guess what? We're running the ball again. And that's the way that they're going to win games this year. And it's going to be really nice for David Montgomery and Gibbs. Montgomery continues to be a guy. I'm going to say it over and over again. If you can buy into David Montgomery, buy into David Montgomery.
Because for some reason he keeps producing, but no one's value on him goes up. It makes no sense.
You should have already done it. But if you haven't done it yet, you need to continue to buy into David Montgomery. And this bye week is a nice time to buy into him if you have the ability or if you have the roster to kind of roster another guy on a bye week. So I'm like, that's the guy that I'm kind of trying to stick into. So don't have Barkley and Gibbs this week, so I'm sticking to starting Mason and Bucky, but Chase Brown is available on the waiver wire. Should I pick him up?
No.
There's 2 ways to think about this, George. When I look at your team, you have Keon, you have Javonte, and you have Roshan.
You should cut Javonte.
Javonte had a good game last week, but again, that was a really weird game. I didn't think that Javonte would have more yards than Breece Hall on the week. That was really strange to me. With Tyler Beatty getting carted off and injured, there's one less running back in that room now. Maybe Javonte gets a little bit more involved. Do I think that you should go out there and get Chase Brown? If you don't get Chase Brown, somebody else will.
That's fine.
And I think that at least for this week, when we're looking at how the week shakes down, they play Baltimore. He looked good in the game last week. The game before that against Washington, 7 attempts for 62 yards. So every week he's getting more yards. He got some goal line carries. He definitely has a good matchup week 6 against the Giants. So do I think he's worth picking up? I do think he's worth picking up. And the guy I would drop would be Javonte Williams. I cannot trust Denver's offense at all. So when it comes down to it, I don't really want to own a Denver Broncos player because it's just as likely that, you look at this game, Bo Nix definitely is taking on a learning curve here. Some moments he looks good, some moments he doesn't. But I can't trust Javonte with a game, right? I really honestly can't with the way his usage has been. And I'd rather take a chance on a guy like Chase Brown over Javonte Williams just because when I see that the chance of this offense to get into the red zone, I see a lot more opportunities for him if he ends up being the back in the red zone. Do I think they're going to continue to give him that role? I don't know. But what I do know is that I'm looking at here, and this is the first time last week where Javonte Williams cracked over 25 yards on the ground. And then he's gotten eclipsed around 60 or so yards overall. Coming down through the season, if we're looking at the schedule, they play the Chargers week 6, New Orleans week 7, Baltimore week 9, Kansas City week 10, Atlanta week 11. You have a couple games against Vegas in there as well, and then a game against Carolina. Week 15, he faces Indy, which is going to be a nice matchup, but who knows if he's actually going to still be the running back in week 15. So I would definitely move Javonte Williams and move into Chase Brown.
The thing on that, George, is just don't be expecting Chase Brown to be a world beater for you. So again, Bob, who's hitting us with follow-up comments? We want to jump in real quick before we get to Z Money.
Yeah. So as we're looking down here, I'm seeing T Money. The guy with Nico, we talked about that, and Mix has a couple questions relating to Walker, but we don't really have any follow-up. We do have a question.
Well, let's keep going where we're at. So Z Money here. Do we trade A-Chain and JSN? I'm doing this all day, Z Money. Two reasons why. Hawkinson just had his window open where he's allowed to start practicing. We mentioned this a couple of times in the past, but the way that the IR works in the NFL is you're not even allowed to be on the practice field whenever you're on your IR unless your window is open. And that window means you get 21 consecutive days to go and practice. And at the end or during that 21 days, you have to be returned to the active roster or you never return. This is why a couple of weeks ago when San Francisco went to Germany and people were like, oh, CMC's back. It's a big deal. It's like, no, it wasn't a big deal at all. He wasn't even allowed to practice. He was just going sightseeing on the company's dime, which is awesome, by the way. So Hawkinson's window's open. That means he's coming back within the next 3 weeks. So I get arguably the best player in the trade in Harrison Jr., and then I also get a potential savior at the tight end position. I want to do this all day. And quite frankly, this is going to be one of these trades that you look back at the end of the year and say it was pretty one-sided.
Where I fall on that is Marvin Harrison Jr. is still the top option on his team from a week-to-week basis. This game should have been absolutely electric. The matchups coming up are matchups that, outside of maybe the Green Bay game, and we'll see what happens to the secondary there with the Chargers. I think that he's set up pretty well. He's also set up pretty well for the back half of the season. You look at week 15, 16, 17, that's Rams, or New England, Carolina, Rams. You also have Seattle week 14, which is a divisional matchup. It's going to be tough. I think that knowing how well JSN has performed and knowing the struggles that HN is going to continue to suffer as long as Tua's not in, I think that you're getting good value. And I think that when it comes down to it with a guy like Hawkinson, just like Joe said, I don't want to, speak on more on Hawkinson. You have, with the way Sam Darnold has been playing, Hawkinson could be an almost immediate usage piece when he gets in the game. I'm not sure how that offense will work with him in it, but it's not going to work any worse than it's already been working, which is fantastic.
It's not taking a step back. That's a good way of putting it.
So while I do love JSN, I think it is time to move on from HN because a player like HN is one of those guys where he's almost feels like in the back of my mind a must start every week because of his explosiveness. But because of how bad this offense has looked for 2 weeks, I was able to give them the benefit of the doubt that last week. But this past week, it was even worse. And I thought HN could get about 25 yards with the new quarterback because from my recollection, I didn't remember Tyler Huntley being that bad with Baltimore, but that just looked.
Oh, the thing with Huntley, he's only a lateral passer.
I mean, that
he only throws left to right. That was whenever Flowers was only catching the ball 6 inches off the line of scrimmage.
So where I fall on that is I would do that trade. You're getting good value back with Hawkinson coming back. Again, with MHJ, you're going to have to eat a couple weeks with Hawkinson still, right? So
that's fine though.
Think about that as it will, but I think with moving HN from your roster, it will open up your roster to another running back that you won't be getting such a low floor right now, even though he does have a pretty high ceiling still. So Revan, absolutely. Yes. 1,000%.
Yes.
This is what I do. Ridley is one of those players. And we went on over the offseason. There's a couple players we talked about, a couple players we got right, a couple so far this season, a couple players we did whiff on. But a guy like Ridley,
Addison's the answer over Leggett,
Yeah,
rather.
a guy like Ridley, new space. Quarterback situation is again in flux. Levis got hurt. Mason Rudolph came in. That didn't even look that good. So I'm sitting here going, Calvin Ridley's not a start for me, unless it's a super heavy matchup dependent kind of game, right? Where with Hopkins, I think both Hopkins and Ridley, depending upon the league that you're in, are borderline. I'm not going to say super droppable, but borderline droppable if there are other players like Addison on your waiver wire. If there's a guy like Addison on your waiver wire, there's absolutely no reason to keep Calvin Ridley.
Absolutely.
Zero reason. You look at the last 2 games, 2 receptions, right? I mean, that I can't even play around with that, right? Like there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go from that. Even, and this is why I say this. Even if you thought Ridley was going to do well in the upcoming weeks, right? Logistically speaking, are you going to start him?
No, you're not. And so here's the thing: we've seen
Addison,
some teams
probably do have a chance to start.
So we saw some guys step up with a backup quarterback. Tennessee's clearly playing their backup quarterback now, but Ridley and that whole Tennessee offense, you got to prove it to me first. So we see you, Mick. We see you, Grapefruit, SMP, and then Revan. We'll get back to your follow-ups there as well. We'll get you all your questions as we go. We got a lot of them coming at us here, and we are jumping back into Amon, my man. First priority, take Wicks or Fields. I'm thinking Wicks, since I could only use Fields for 1 week. That's first off, Wicks is going to give you long-term value, and there's no guarantee that Fields is going to play much more this year because the Steelers want to play Russell Wilson. So with that being said, I love Wicks. I do think that the injury situation could be shaping up really good for him. I'm on absolutely. I would lean Wicks in that same situation.
Yeah, as I sit here looking at that pickup priority, we did talk about this the other day. Wicks is one of those players that with Christian Watson down, we were talking about this in the offseason. If one of these wide receivers go down, there's immediate value in other wide receivers in this room, almost immediate. Mm-hmm. And we saw that out of Wicks this game. Extremely efficient, did have 2 drops. But again, there are going to be more targets thrown his way. Tucker Kraft is involved, so there's targets going this way. Jordan Love is going to throw the ball. Jacobs is going to be fine. When we look at if I should use a first waiver priority, I think when I see a player like Wicks, and when we look at Christian Watson, who has been injury prone in the past, that we were talking a couple weeks ago about is Juwan Jennings the guy to own? Christian Watson might be heading to injured reserve, right? That's coming straight from Packers Wire. Might be heading to injured reserve. So again, that's 4 games that you're getting with Wicks. With Fields, if you need a quarterback, Fields could be a great play this week, knowing that Joe said that Fields is probably not going to start, but it's looking more like he is going to start right now at this point on Tuesday. So Fields is a nice choice.
Did he not practice?
They're saying that they're still thinking that Fields is a starter. That's the news right now. But for the long term,
it's Tuesday. They don't practice Tuesday,
right?
Wait till tomorrow.
For the long term, for the next 4 weeks, I do think that Wicks will have will be a valuable piece. So I would pick up.
Let's put it this way: there's a chance you're playing Wicks in your fantasy playoffs. There's not a chance you're playing Fields.
Hey, Levin. Hey, SV. We see you. We see all the questions. We'll get to everybody over here. I do want to touch on RGQ for a minute here. 0-4 sucks.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about it. And 0-4 particularly sucks if your team has been rather inconsistent, or if you have faced the strongest person in your league on a week-to-week basis. 0-4 is not something we like to see. 0-4 is something that we unfortunately do see at times. So if I'm 0-4, I'm not able to take on any injured players like A.J. Brown. I'm not able to take on any injured players like Cooper Kupp. But what I am going for...
there's a clause on that, Bob, because
listen,
if you are a very high scoring team, third or higher in your league, you could absorb one of these players and swing for the fence.
You could, but you want to ideally, if you're 0-4 and your team hasn't been scoring, you want to go out there and try to get that flavor of the month right now, which would be like a Deontay guy, stuff like that. Players that are hot right now that have pretty good schedules. Like I said, J.K. Dobbins coming out of the pipeline, does have Denver and Arizona, with Arizona being a much better play in week 7. But again, you're not playing him in week 5 because of the bye. So, Revin, if your team's scoring, I think, or RGQ, if your team is scoring, I think that eventually good things will come. But it also comes down to, are there any pieces that we can trim away, like those Mark Andrewses, like the Devin Achans right now, that I'm forcing myself to start that might not be worth a start right now? So that's kind of the thing. If you're 0-4, that's the thing to start thinking about, because playoffs will start sooner than you know it, and you want to start building. So if I'm 0-4, I'm looking at this week 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm seeing where my bye weeks are on my current roster, and I am going after this first bye and after week 6, I'm going after and I'm trading 4 Detroit players. I'm trading 4 Chargers players because they already had the bye, and I can't absorb another loss later in the season. So I'm targeting, and Joe, if we could pull up the bye weeks really quickly here.
Which bye weeks are we looking for here, Bobby?
I want week 5 and week 6 bye weeks.
All right, so week 5, we are looking at Tennessee, Philly, Chargers, Detroit. Week 6, we are looking at Minnesota,
so
Miami.
Guys, if I'm 0-4, as I see it, guys that I'm targeting, if I'm 0-4, I'm targeting Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears if I'm 0-4, because I can eat that week 5 bye and be set for the rest of the season. I'm targeting Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta, guys like that. I'm going after QJ. I'm going after Ladd McConkey. I'm going after Dobbins, Worthy, Kyron. Maybe if you're able,
I'm telling you, AJ Brown's the buy of the week, guys.
Maybe
there's
if
no
you're
way
able
around
to
that.
stomach
AJ Brown is the buy of the week.
AJ Brown is down, like they're on bye, so you can stomach another game there. The Jordan Addisons,
and Bob, your point is basically, because you're 0-4, hitting the 0-5, the likelihood you're going to need to radically hit lightning in a bottle. So if you can give something a little bit less, eat that bye. In AJ Brown's case, there's even a little more uncertainty, but you eat it, so that way, boom, you do have the lightning. So when it catches around, almost every fantasy league will have a team that's 500 make it. That's 8-8. And if, like I said, you catch the right lightning and you make yourself a team that goes 8-3 down the stretch, not only do you come into the playoffs, you come in as the hot team that no one wants to play with.
And SJ, we see your comment down there too. SJ will definitely get to every comment, and that's kind of my viewpoint. If I'm 1-3, 0-4, I'm gonna want to eat those early buys, and I'm gonna want to trade for players, because it doesn't, like, if I go 0-5 now and then can rip off a couple of wins, it's going to be a lot easier for me to do that if I don't have to worry about bye week management. Because what you don't want, if you're 0-4 right now, what you don't want is to buy into week 14 bye week players like Nico, like Derrick Henry, like Pittman, Anthony Richardson.
Because then you're screwed.
Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson. You need to, you got, or at least if you're buying into them, you trade them before that week 14 bye, because you need them playing if you're 0-4 or 0-4.
And remember, it gets, each week that passes, it's harder to do trades. It's just the way it is.
And then there will be that bye. Then there will be that week where you can't do anymore. So you want to get that week. You want to be settled before that.
Because the other part is week 14 has 6 teams on a bye. It's going to be brutal. Struggling with buys this week. Speaking of buys, would I rather have? Javonte, certainly not. Irving, possibly. Dowdle, oh, dude, that's not a great list. Yes, cut Javonte for Wandale. That part is true, Patrick. To answer the second part of that trade. So Bucky Irving of that group of 4 is the only one I really like. I mean, I would take Chase Brown by default as the second one, but the only one I'm happy with clicking the button with Saturday morning or Sunday morning is Bucky Irving.
Yeah, where we're at on this in terms of
Although I would do Bucky or Bucky and Wandale pretty comfortably.
In terms of this week, Wandale Robinson, with the amount of targets that he's been getting, is an absolute must start against Seattle. I think that the way that game worked out for Seattle, there's a lot of injuries in the secondary, a lot of injuries in the linebacking core, a lot of injuries along the defensive line. Seattle is really banged up. And I think that Wandale is a great play with the amount of targets that he's been getting. Even if Neighbors can't go, there's really nobody that I'm super concerned about that would be able to kind of rein him in terms of his targets. He could definitely see a huge target share just in the vein of Malik Neighbors if Malik Neighbors goes down. When it comes to who I'd rather start out of these running backs, I do think Javonte's droppable for Wandale. So then it comes down to Irving, Dowdle, and Chase. Okay, so Bucky Irving, I think, is a definite start for me. I don't think that Rachaad White, like we've been saying for weeks, is worth considering, like just in terms of how that game is going to go. Rico Dowdle, the Steelers are tough. They're sometimes their defense plays well, and sometimes they just look like a crapshoot at times. But I'm always concerned about putting up a running back against the Steelers. I'll just throw that out there right now. So Dowdle's off my list. So then that leaves Chase Brown. And so looking at Chase Brown, looking at Cincinnati, they're playing Baltimore. These division matchups are always a back and forth kind of game here.
But they're high scoring.
I think that he could succeed. So where I fall on that is I take Irving, I take Chase, I drop Javonte, and I pick up Wandale. Wandale does have long-term value across the whole season, and I think he's returning more value right now than Javonte Williams, and that's just kind of how those stats have been rolling down. I think Javonte Williams might have a couple good games, but I really don't want any part of Javonte right now. And when we look at, See,
I still am leaning Bucky and Wandale after you pick them up, though.
Again, the game against Javonte is facing Vegas. It is a divisional matchup. So I'm not really putting much stock into, Vegas with Max Crosby out, how that's going to look. I'm just not sold on Denver. And I'm really not going to be upset with myself at the end of the day if I don't start a Denver player.
That's true.
That's kind of how it comes down to that. Now, if he were putting up like 20 points a game, sure. But if his floor is 7 and I can
just put 20 points a day, you want to be in Denver.
If he's putting up 8 points, 10 points a game, and I can equally put in somebody who could smash 20 points, I'm going to do that. Wandale's a guy that could get past 16 on the regular with the way he's been used. And Chase Brown showed you that he could do that too. I have Dak and Goff as my QBs, but my bench is full. Should I drop Goff for Trey Sermon if possible, or hold Goff, especially with this performance last night? Here's what needs to be said about Goff's performance last night. Goff's performance last night, outside of the touchdown catch that he caught, was a fantastic NFL quarterback show. Not fantasy.
That's right. Okay.
So Goff is a player that for most teams is not cracking the starting lineup quarterback wise on a week-to-week basis.
That's 100% right.
So when I think about Goff, and granted, the game was magnificent. I mean, that when he trotted in for the touchdown pass from Amon-Ra, I was like, oh my God, like that was amazing. I really, I love that. This past week, the weekly finish was 4, but if you look, he almost had 300 yards passing, 18 for 18, but he only threw for 2 touchdowns. So, I think the way this team is going to work against Dallas week 6, he's probably going to have a great game. Against Minnesota, it's probably going to be tough. Tennessee, going to be tough. Or not going to be tough, but going to be okay. Green Bay, going to be tough. as I see it coming down the list here, week 11, week 12, Jacksonville, Indy, and then Chicago. If you're going to go out and drop him right now, you're probably playing Dak week 6 regardless. So if you want to drop him and then pick him up on the back end of the season before he faces Jacksonville again, I think that's a smart decision to do. But in the interim, Trey Sermon is definitely worth a pickup right now because of JT's health. And when we look at Trey Sermon, he didn't run very well, but again, it's a running back that he probably wasn't getting all the first team reps in practice. He definitely wasn't getting those first team reps. With now potentially getting first team reps, he might look a bit better.
See here, the thing with Sermon is he'll get you volume because the offense has to. He doesn't have the superstar box clicked, which means that he's going to have significant downside compared to JT. We had these questions earlier. Who should we look at? The player that people kept comparing him to was, could I have either Sermon or Algier? The answer all day, every day is Algier. But that being said, for all the reasons Bob just said, you're never going to put Goff in your lineup anyway over Dak. So you might as well have the better asset on your team. And there's a good chance by the time Dak's bye week comes around, you'll be able to get Goff or a Goff equivalent when it comes around. So J-Tube and James.
J-Tube, we see y'all.
We see you down there. Let's jump into the next one. Ricky, had Walker. Oh, dude. Well, you won, so that's all that matters. You win, you win. It doesn't really matter how we get there.
Logistically speaking, unless you were in trouble, you most likely were not starting Ken Walker yesterday because of the way that Detroit's defense had been playing, because of Ken Walker coming back.
And given your other two backs, you're playing
you probably
Mason
weren't playing him anyway. So it's nice to know that you got Breece and Mason and Walker. I think with the way Breece is playing, that game last week and the game before it, it's a little bit concerning. So moving forward, maybe you start Mason and Walker, but I think Hall will be fine. And I'm going to need a couple more weeks to kind of get over what happened this past week with Hall. That's kind of just that I just really struggle with that right now.
It was a monsoon.
I get it, but the usage is just not where I want it to be at for Breece Hall. So I'm on. What two should I start this week? Bucky, Rashad, Singletary, Hunt. You can't start Rashad.
Nope.
I think that a nice play for
and again, we're better on the sit-em starts on Wednesday and Thursday after we get some injury designation.
I think right now where I fall, Joe, I think I play Hunt, especially with the injury to Rice. I think I play Hunt, and that's pretty confident for me. I also think that when we look at what happened to the Seahawks, I think that Singletary didn't have a good game last week against Dallas, but he didn't have to. But I look at this game and how Seahawks got gashed by the run game. Granted, Singletary.
This is a simple category. The Giants' offensive line does not and is nowhere near Detroit's offensive line. Do not try to make that correlation at all. Will not work. The answer is Hunt and Irvin.
I didn't, but it's definitely, it brings it into the conversation.
No, it shouldn't.
Why Singletary might be in your conversation.
That Giants running game is horrible, and Devin Singletary, while not the cause, is certainly part of not being the solution. So I would go Bucky and Hunt. But again, at the end of the day, we need to wait till week 3 or 4 to get the answer.
Yeah.
Or correction, Wednesday or Thursday to get the answer with the injury report.
Where I fall on this, I still fall on Bucky. Bucky's looked really good. And I do start Hunt just because the Chiefs are going to have to figure out ways to get this ball downfield, not through Rashee Rice. And speaking of Rashee Rice, we have Andre down here, getting smacked with injuries. It's really tough when these high profile, again, we've talked about this before, but just bringing it back up is that all of these injuries happen. And in the offseason, we're saying, if an injury does happen, if this happens, injuries happen. It's part of the game. But this has been a big year where all of these fantasy relevant players have gotten injured at the same time. We're not talking about third string, fourth string, Tim Patrick's of the world, right? We're talking about the guys that we are banking our season on in some respect. And the Rice injury just flat out sucks. So Praylin, welcome to the show. Let's go back up here to a couple of these questions coming down the pipeline. I do wish I could play Mostert. Or I do wish you could play Mostert. But again, what this game looks like, the matchup is nice on.
Well, I
is
think
nice
you'll be able to play
Patriots,
Mostert this week. Amon, when Mostert's back, he's going immediately into my lineup. I can tell you that right now. Mostert is going to open up this Miami Dolphins in a way that most people are not going to see happening. Mostert has always been the driving force of that team. He is their volume back. Most people see because Tyreek is the smoke show, but at the end of the day, the core of the Dolphins offense is a running offense. It's one of the misconceptions that make them so great. And Mostert 100% is that driving force. I will be playing Mostert the second he is available, whether that's this week, 3 weeks from now, whatever. The second. So Dark's jumping in here. Should I trade Allen while I can still get something for him? Essentially, is your question. I look at his schedule coming up here. We got Houston and the Jets. Though, first off, Allen always balls out against a comparably good quarterback. Really, this week is kind of the only exception in his career where he hasn't. When he was faced against another big show, Burrow, Mahomes, he balls out. Stroud is in that category now. Then he hates the Jets almost as much as Bill Belichick does. So we look at his next 2 weeks. I think that, yeah, you could say on paper it looks like a rough schedule. I think this is Allen time, baby. I want to keep him these 2 weeks, and then I look at selling him when his schedule gets soft against Tennessee, because what we've seen here from the offense so far in Buffalo is if they don't need to use Josh Allen, they ain't gonna, and you're not going to need Josh Allen in 3 weeks. So what I would do if I were you, Dark Side, I'd use him this week. Next week, I'd sell him entering into week 7.
Yeah, Dark Side, in my opinion, I do think that I wouldn't sell him right now, because he just came off a good game, 4 touchdowns a week or so ago, and then this week nothing. If I were selling Josh Allen, what would I be selling him for? That's the question. Is that if I'm selling Josh Allen is probably a fantasy player that nobody ever thinks about selling. But if I'm selling him, he's probably going to be involved in some Mondo trade, right? Where you're thinking of piece for piece for piece for piece. You're like, oh, give me back CJ Stroud. Oh, give me back Jordan Love. And then I want Jamar Chase, or I want someone of a certain caliber. I don't know if it's truly a great decision right now to trade out of Josh Allen. And basically the only other quarterbacks that I think you'd want to trade into, Jane Daniels and Lamar Jackson at this point in time, you can't. And the person's not going to want to trade out of Lamar for or Daniels to move into Josh Allen at this point right now, because those guys have been playing really well. So I think that Joe's right. I think if you want to sell Allen, you wait a little bit, wait till that soft schedule, wait until you can move and say, hey, this I'm willing to offer you Allen. And if I'm getting back a Jamar Chase, if I'm getting back a combination of David Montgomery, Mixon, a couple of those other guys, Walker, a couple other pieces in there to make my team really, really elite, I would do it. But I really don't see the need to trade Josh Allen because, yeah, it was a bad game. I mean, it was pretty much out of hand pretty early. And, through 29 passes, had 5 rushes. That didn't really do anything. Finished as quarterback 28 on the season. But this is a fun fact, just looking at Fantasy Pros. Week 1, number 1 quarterback. Week 2, number 28 quarterback. Week 3, number 1 quarterback. Week 4, number 28 quarterback. I mean, you can't sell the guy. I don't think you can, because if you have number 1 upside potential, you can't sell it unless you're getting back number 1 upside potential. And the only guys that give you that right now in the quarterback department are Lamar and are Jane Daniels right now. Maybe a back end Baker Mayfield, but who wants to move into that?
Maybe you do Kyler and another piece off
But
that team.
Kyler's not.
It's and the other part is
not
dark side. It's hard to move quality quarterbacks in fantasy. It just is.
So, do I drop the Browns defense for the Broncos defense this week? I'd consider it.
Browns are going to Washington, so that's a hard one. Denver is going to be playing Vegas. Again, not the hardest offense in the world. If we're looking at streaming defenses right here, I really love Seattle this week. They're hosting the Giants. And the couple of other streamers that are jumping off the page to me that should be available. New England, Miami is certainly a good one to pick up. Miami can't do anything right now.
Yeah, he's got a few other defenses on there: the Patriots, Bears, and Commanders.
Patriots will be certainly on the list. The Bears are playing Carolina. That's certainly viable.
I would stay away from the Bears. I would consider the Commanders, but I'd probably stay away from them. I think my best bets in terms of those streaming defenses, I'm throwing the Broncos into my DFS lineups this week. It's really on a week-to-week basis, it is difficult to figure out these best defense because you think a defense is really good, and then all of a sudden they suck at what they're supposed to be good at. I look at it and I see Denver, and looking at the games, I'm just like, that's a pretty good matchup against the Raiders. The Raiders can't seem to move the ball on the ground. They can throw the ball, but the Broncos have looked good against both teams that can do both of those things. So I'm actually on Denver's defense this week for DFS lineups, and I think in terms of a streaming defense, I think you can't really. I think that the Raiders do have a weak enough offense right now, with not a great defense either. So I think that the Broncos do have the opportunities to create a lot of turnovers if necessary. So I'm on the Broncos this week. Yeah, Andrews was definitely washed last year. There's no doubt about that. Bills did get exposed by an elite defense, and he's got a lot more coming. I'm thinking of trading Josh Allen for Jane Daniels plus something. This is the type of deal that I was just mentioning, Dark Side, is that if I'm moving out of Josh Allen, I'm moving into Jaden Daniels or Lamar Jackson. And those are the only, and even Jalen Hurts. Again, you gotta move into a quarterback that has that weekly number one upside potential with their legs and with their arm. Jordan Love for me is also one of those guys that has that number one kind of quarterback upside potential, but he's going to have to get over that injury a little bit more, get back into the swing of things. But I think that if you're going to trade Josh Allen, that this would be a kind of thing. I would ask for Jaden Daniels, and I would ask for, depending on my team, I would ask for David Montgomery. I'd ask for James Cook. I'd ask for, you can't get Nico. I would maybe try to build in, would be a piece that I would want back, that I would need back. Because again, I'd look for a Debo potentially with a number one wide receiver upside if I'm selling a quarterback with number one upside. But again, this is the type of trade that you got to get. If you're going to trade off of Josh Allen, which I don't think I'd do, this is the trade that I'd do it for.
And we love the inner comments here in our local football flavor community here. But yeah, hitting on some of the same points we're saying there. I don't think that Allen is shot. Yes, he played a strong defense. But Baltimore was the thing you have to understand about that game. Baltimore was literally playing for their lives. If Baltimore loses that game and they go 1-3, the whole city implodes around them.
We got you, J2.
And their schedule is hell against Baltimore coming up. That was a must-win game on a primetime game, which typically Baltimore wins anyway. So I don't take that as much as Allen's in trouble, as much as when Baltimore wants to step up, they can step up really damn tall.
Yeah.
All right. So, Bob, where do we leave off on here?
Let's move here. So Ayush's also Recon double username here. So let's answer a couple of these questions here. 12-team PPR. This is your team. Any trade tips? You have mentioned your team. You're 2-2, which is so solid right now. You got Saquon on bye this week, and then Kyron next week. who do I keep? Who do I trade away? And then as you were mentioning, too, you were talking here about trading away a kicker. I think it's very relevant, very, very relevant to move and this is something that I was reading into, is that if you are 2-2, 1-3, you can move off of a guy like a tight end, a one-off piece, and move into something else if it makes, because you can string kickers. You can get 10 points here, 15 points here, 11 points here. You can move a kicker. I think Aubrey is definitely a piece that can be included in a deal. So let's go back up to the top, and we see all the questions, and we'll get to every question that we have here. So, trading away Zay last year midway, and last 7 weeks he put up 20 every time. I think he's a ramp up type of guy. I do agree with the idea that there are players in this league that ramp into things. Again, Najee is one of those guys that I was mentioning earlier that ramp into performing better. Ayuk could definitely ramp into doing something better here. So you're sitting here with Josh Allen, Saquon, Kyron, Pickens, Laporta, Christian Kirk, Braylon Allen, Chase Brown, Corum, and Davis. And we're moving and we're trying to talk to this guy here. We got you, Braylon. We got you, J-Tube. Moving into something from this guy here, we have Lamar, Hall, Stevenson, MHJ, DK, Brock Bowers, Brian Robinson, Addison, Keenan Shaheed, JSN. So for your team, just keep those players in mind there, Joe, so we can kind of just flip back. If I were you,
what we could do here, so I always say, I'm gonna just go by Rico. Rico, what I always appreciate is that you want to know what you want to get rid of first, and then you kind of let the other guy decide if it's good enough for him. That's always kind of my starting point of appreciating trades. So when I look at your present roster right now, receiver's certainly the spot I want to upgrade at. So when we're doing that, we gotta know that the kicker by itself ain't moving the needle, but it can be an over the top piece. So if we're looking to upgrade one of the receivers, I believe our best way of doing this is going to be a 2-for-1 add-on. I think Chase Brown should be the guy that you use to give away. I think you should be doing a 3-to-1 trade if we're considering Aubrey. It would, in my mind, want to be Chase Brown and then probably Pickens, because you have this FOMO of getting burnt in the past on Flowers. So if we look at moving that, then we got to look at what he has that we're looking to try to pick off with him here. Sorry, Bob, I clicked the wrong one. Where's he at? Here's his roster again. And then when we're looking to try to pick up off his specific roster here, sorry for the technical difficulties, guys. Here, Bob is way better at these buttons than I am. Don't let anyone ever try to tell you otherwise. So as we're going here, long story short, get the receiver. You're going to want to upgrade your receiver, go off of where you're at here, and go through the situation of Chase and Pickens, upgrade it, pairing it specifically with this guy, which again, I'm not a fan of solely selling yourself out for just one team. I think your best bet is going to be, hey, this is the package I want to move. What can I get for it? You could argue that DK is an acceptable return. I don't think that you're going to get Pickens and Chase Brown and get Junior, but I do think you can get DK for him. I think that would probably be the starting point that I would want to look at. He's got 20 million receivers as it is. That would be a direction I would want to look with that trade if he is that heavy with where he's at. And then the other part is he probably going to have to get rid of anyone because you can't do a true 3-in-1 trade anymore. Toss in Shaheed on the back end and just see if you can get lucky with it. So that's what I would recommend going forward when you're looking with that trade there. as Bob is resolving his technical difficulties on the other side here. So we see all you guys' questions. We will dive to them all. I love the conversations going back and forth. Dark Side, you really know how to poke the room here. So Daniels is great. There's no doubt about it. But as we were saying before, I like Allen. I can't fight that because Allen has the ability to throw it around the yard. Daniels is the one who could be able to make it work here. So jumping back in here, Dom. Dom, welcome to the party. Do I take Mike Evans for Swift and T. Higgins? Your running backs are Najee, Swift, and Bijan. So it's an interesting trade you got proposed your way here. I would like to have Mike Evans on my team. I do believe that overall that is a good upgrade for you, getting the Mike Evans on your roster, given the fact that you're really not going to feel Swift leaving because you're playing Najee and Bijan every week anyway.
Well,
we've mentioned the past about T. Higgins' really potential downhill slide that can happen in the playoffs. And Mike Evans, I think he's going to really benefit from Godwin's big jump. I think Evans is a guy part isn't going to change. So Evans is a guy that I am getting for knowing that I just had Rice die. Evans is the guy I'm looking to replace Rice, given my current assets. Dom, I'm all for that move right there.
Yeah, I'm all for doing that as well, Dom. I think that Mike Evans is an asset that over the long term of the season definitely holds a lot of value. He hasn't ramped up yet into his touchdowns. Older player, takes a little bit of time. I think he's one of those players that also is going to ramp up in his production. He's on a team that's solid enough, that's using the wide receivers are looking good, and I think that that's a very fair trade for a player like Mike Evans. But as a Mike Evans owner, I definitely would want to try to get more. I wouldn't just trade it for just those two players. I think I'd want to get a little bit more if I was the Evans owner, but I think that's a fair enough trade for sure.
So we'll get to all your questions. We see him down there. Revan, I saw that Adams also officially requested his trade from the Raiders, which is great. At the end of the day, his contract is nearly untradeable for someone to absorb in season. If they do, there's going to be a lot of financial wiggling around, which quite frankly, some teams are willing to do and some teams aren't willing to do mid-season. We'll see if it happens, but who doesn't ever want to escape the perpetually sinking ship that is the Raiders organization? Oh, by the way, Tom Brady wants to buy him. It'd be great. Get him off my damn TV. Sorry, guys.
Javier, and if we missed anything, just, we'll come back to it, but I think we're rolling along pretty well right here. Should I trade Marvin Harrison Jr. for Hill? I have MHJ, St. Brown, Reed, Cup, Pittman. No, it's unnecessary.
Not keep Harrison.
I think that when you look at your team, is that Hill and Marvin Harrison Jr. both have the same upwards potential. When you look at a weekly finish kind of framework, Marvin Harrison and Tyreek Hill, when all their situations are fine, definitely have a wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 4 finish in their kind of purview, right? So I'm not going to move Marvin Harrison Jr. into Tyreek Hill right now. But when I would consider doing it is maybe possibly when we get a little bit more of a clear picture on if or when Tua is coming back. That's when I would think about pulling something like this. I think that MHJ, St. Brown, Reed, Cup, you have 3 wide receivers here that are most likely going to finish in the top 12 of the league by year's end. Then you have Cup, who, if he comes back and plays and he's very healthy, could finish in the top 16, 17, 24 of wide receivers. So I don't think that you need to go out there and get Hill right now, because for you right now, Hill would be in a barrier for your team, because you can't start Hill right now. With the wide receivers that you have, you're not going to be starting Hill. I would only recommend going after Hill if you want to build for that future part. But with a build like MHJ, you're already set for the future. So I don't think you need to take something like that on personally. I mean, it's a fair
all in
trade.
one show. So looking at this trade, Bijan for Gibbs, Kittle, and Swift. All right, so I have a lot of different thoughts about this. I think I would do it off the bat. So when I look at this trade, I kind of see it more so as Bijan and Jennings and Swift's the throw-in. It's long story short. Swift is a guy that shouldn't really be moving a lot of needles. He never should be. His name recognition makes him more loved than he really should be. So as I look at this, I'm not loving Swifty. I think, quite frankly, Travis Kelce might be the only one who really is. So I don't want to get on this. I don't want to look at Swift as being part of this trade as being relevancy because he really isn't. Mm-hmm. Who are you going to be cutting needs to be factored into this as your quadrant, unless you just threw someone on the IR. But on its surface, Bijan and Jennings for Gibbs and Kittle, I'm okay with. I'm very okay with that.
Yeah, I think this is fine.
I almost prefer it more if Swift isn't in the trade. To be totally honest with you, because I don't want to cut someone for Swift.
Swift is a back end piece. I think that you're moving Jennings. Jennings had an absolutely elite performance for all time a couple weeks back. This past week, a really good performance. So when I see it, Bijan is dealing with a little bit of an injury, moving into Gibbs, who looks and is giving all of these opportunities still in a split, but is being given all of these opportunities and is afforded a role that is both goal line representative. He's pass catching. He's getting the ball in the midfield. I think that if I'm going out there all in one, I do this trade because you're getting back good value. And for me, the Bijan to Gibbs is almost like a lateral move, right? You're moving name recognition wise. You're moving laterally, production wise. Gibbs is going to give you. They both have the potential to give you.
They both have good potential, yeah.
And this is more like Jennings straight into Kittle and Swift. And I think that right now, that's huge for you to be able to get Kittle. It is really huge for you to be able to get Kittle. So, so that's kind of where I'm at. Let's get down to the next question here. Well, let's touch on this Chicago for a moment. With the solid QBR again, Joe and I both feel that.
When does he have a clean pocket for 6 attempts?
With the weather coming out for Chicago, that they're, and he's going to be playing some games in domes and games out of domes. And so it's definitely something to be considered, but I'm still not trading into anything Chicago. I'm trading out of Chicago. And if I get a Chicago piece on the back end as like an add-on and I have to drop, say, Brandon Cooks, I'm okay with that. But that's not really my target right now.
And another thing, if you want to dive into statistics, you always be able to come up with something. But remember, QBR was invented by ESPN to make Tim Tebow look like a good quarterback. And anyone who ever saw him in the pros knows that you can make up any stat possible. And ESPN basically invented that for clickbait. So do never bring me the QBR again as a relevant statistic to make someone look good. Don't do it. I know too much about stats, baby.
Javier, what can I do to upgrade my running back position? JT Mason, B-Rob Pollard, Braylon Allen Swift. Thanks, guys. I think you're solid. Where I would go with JT's concern, and knowing that you want to move into, knowing that you were thinking of moving MHJ, what I would think about doing is trying to see. You have a couple of the guys that I would try to trade into in Brian Robinson and Pollard. And I do like Braylon Allen. And Swift is not going to be great all games. He's going to have his usage. But again, last week was a pretty high usage in comparison to what he was doing the last couple of weeks. If I was going to go after a player right now and I wanted to upgrade my running backs, I would want to go after James Cook and I want to go after Aaron Jones. And here's what I'd try to do. I'd try to move, if I look at my wide receiver situation, right, and say I did want to move off MHJ. I'm not saying you should, but let's say, Javier, that I did want to move off of MHJ. What I would try to do is I'd move MHJ, and I'd say, okay, Aaron Jones owner, I want Aaron Jones, and give me back Stephon Diggs. Something of that nature would be enough for me to kind of have a little bit of wiggle room on my wide receivers, because I don't want to trade St. Brown. And I really don't want to trade Jaden Reed.
No, you want it.
Cup is a tradable piece, absolutely. And Pittman right now, I don't think could net you much unless we see that Flacco is playing. So if you needed a running back and you were trading a guy like Michael Pittman, you'd probably only be able to move into a player like Zach Moss, and you'd probably only be able to move into a player like Kareem Hunt or Devin Singletary, something of that nature.
Yeah, but Moss would be a significant upgrade. See, if I'm looking at this from this perspective for you here, Javier, is that Swift would be the guy I would want to get off my roster to be able to upgrade the running back room with, and then looking at your receivers. First off, I don't think you need to do this trade this week. So I think that you're putting yourself in a bad situation by forcing it this week. I think you're better off doing it next week if Pittman gives you something. Because I do think that with Richardson out, Pittman's going to give you another decent week, 15 or more-ish. With that, pairing him up with Swift, maybe get lucky and his volume continues. And then all of a sudden, now we can do a pretty decent 2-for-1 and really upgrade whichever room you need to.
And if you're
probably the running back
Javier,
room.
If you're sitting pretty, Javier, in terms of, your record, you could definitely buy into Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's a guy that you could definitely buy into at this point in time.
You might even be able to do Swift for Mixon straight up if you're willing to absorb the potential risk of him not
everybody,
playing.
T, we see you. Everybody, we see you. We'll get to your questions in due time. So, Mick.
So, Mick, as I was saying, once the trade request became official, it should, if I believed he was going to get moved or I knew where he was going to go. The only way it would go up is once I know where he's going. Because the second this got happened, the whole internet went, oh, he's Rishi's replacement. He's Rishi's replacement. The Oakland Raiders are going to do absolutely nothing to make Patrick Mahomes' life better. Don't even think he's going.
Vegas isn't going to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. The Raiders will not do that. They will spite themselves before not doing that and getting nothing in return for them.
I don't think the Jets can afford it either.
That's the problem. Not many teams, including the Raiders themselves, are going to be able to make it so it's viable to actually move Adams. It's going to be a very tough putt to make this happen. And in all likelihood, he's going to have to wait for one of two things to happen. The one thing happens for sure, which is each week that passes in the NFL schedule, the trade gets 1/17 easier to make for financials.
Okay, so hold on. This is how it could happen. You could see a Devontae Adams to Pittsburgh for Russell Wilson and that second round pick. You could see something like that.
Well, that would, I don't even know if that helps his stock, though. I don't know if putting him with Justin Fields makes me want him. George Pickens hasn't been lighting the world on fire. So to answer your question here, Mick, is we're completely in speculation world. There's very few teams who have the ability to trade through and the capital to do it. So I think the reality of what we're going to have happen here is Adams is going to bitch and moan for 3 weeks until we get to the NFL deadline. Because like I said, the next 3 weeks, that makes it roughly 20% easier to get the trade through due to the structure of the salary cap. Then it might happen. The other thing that's possible during the next 3 weeks is another major receiver goes down and someone's down and out for the count. Maybe it turns out that the concussion that Devontae Smith has is a lot deeper than they think it is. And maybe he's on the IR and we never really get him back, but Philly still thinks they can win it. All of these things happen over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, you might also see something to the Ravens, but, the Ravens making splash moves isn't necessarily. They did go out there and get Roquan Smith 1 year. If they have the capital and the money, I could see them doing that. And that would be a team where I think that he would have a decent amount of value, and Zay's kind of value would kind of come in line a little bit more. It's definitely something to keep your eye on.
At this point, it's just speculation. I personally, as an Adams owner, I wouldn't move him. I would keep him. I would. He's going to stay on the injured list anyway. I just ride him out, and I would just let it go. How do
So
we feel about buying low? Dude, if you can get that trade through, I absolutely would love it. I have a league where I'm trying to move Brees that I had Rice go down in, and I'm probably aiming too high, but I think that this is a decent spot. You're probably more likely to get Mixon than Walker, but I like that trade.
Yeah, Tyreek and Mixon for Brees. Those are three players that, either hurt or their situations have changed drastically or a bit. I think that a trade like that is fair enough. You're getting back a good amount of value, and you're probably not going to get Walker after his big game. And I don't know if I'd necessarily shoot for Walker after his big game like that. But when I look at it here, Mick, Tyreek in the short term might not help you right now. So you might want to actually target somebody else. But if the owner has Tyreek and Mixon, I think trading Tyreek and Mixon is definitely something that I would consider for Brees because you're getting back good value. Teams that I would also look at again would be again going after and trying to look at the Jamar Chase owner, seeing if I could go after and look at the Debo owner, seeing if I can see what's happening with the DK and the JSN owners before I make a big splash move in trading Brees. Because again, I do think that Brees is still going to return some value, but the coaching staff really has to figure out how they're going to land it with him. A guy, I'm going to say it over and over again because he's a guy that is having that value right now is Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed is a target that I've drafted him. He's also a target that's going to be used in this offense. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this. I might not try to buy into Tyreek right now, and I still think that Brees carries a lot of value, but his value has been trending down over the last couple of weeks, which is concerning. Grapefruit. I lost Rishi Rice and need to start either Xavier Worthy or Brandon Ayuk. Which way am I leaning? In terms of which way my initial lean is definitely looking more towards Worthy. But again, when I see this, Mr. Grapefruit, I really think to myself, the usage for Ayuk is sound. He's getting between 5 and 10 targets every game this year. Worthy, they're definitely going to have a game plan to feed him. And the Saints, as a defense, let me take a look here for a moment in terms of the defensive chart for the Saints. Let me take a look right here. I think that there's potential for the New Orleans Saints to stop Worthy, but I don't think that Brandon Ayuk or Worthy are going to put up huge games this week. I lean right now on Tuesday more towards Xavier Worthy, but I think I'd like to revisit that with you a little bit later in the week because right now I'm definitely leaning Worthy more, and it's a usage thing. I think that with this game against Washington, it's going to be a game where there's going to be a decent amount of points scored. And we saw Kyler Murray and the coaching staff there kind of give up on passing against Washington. Washington is definitely a team that can be beat, but you could definitely see a bigger game out of Jawan Jennings or out of Deebo Samuel than Ayuk in this game. With Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce being primary weapons along with Hunt in this game coming up against the Saints, I think that Xavier Worthy is my better lean here. Lazard's on my train block. I also have A.J. Brown, DJ Moore, Shakir, Ridley, JSN, and Odunze. Think I should make an offer. What would it be? So, Revin, if I'm thinking about moving any of those players, I do love Shakir a lot. Olave also has a good amount of value right now. JSN a great amount of value. Ridley, unfortunately, like we said, he's a drop. You got to move on from Ridley and pick up Addison. I think when I see this set of players here, when AJ Brown comes back after this bye, your team is going to be in a better situation. DJ Moore is getting some targets. Last week the targets weren't as much, so I'm willing to stand on him instead of trading him. But I'm not buying into DJ Moore again if I'm going after a guy. If I were selling anybody right now out of those players, I think that if I'm looking to upgrade at wide receiver, you're probably going to have to pair DJ Moore with JSN. to move into something a little bit better. I don't know how much more up the ladder you could go. Maybe you can move DJ Moore and JSN into a Mike Evans. Maybe you can move them into a Brandon Ayuk, and you could probably move them into a Diggs. I would also consider George Pickens this week. They face Dallas. Again, Dallas's defense hasn't looked great. The game last week was really good. But again, there was a lot of catch up. The next couple of weeks for George Pickens, Dallas, Vegas, those look like good matchups. Jets is going to be tough. Then they got the Giants in Washington. If you can move your way into Pickens with what you have on your roster, I would think about doing that. Also, if you want to move your way out of Pickens before these big games, you can definitely do that if you're upgrading to a much better, more reliable piece. He is going to have some tough games after week 10. So that's all to kind of keep into consideration as well. So I would target a guy like Pickens. He's probably not going to cost you a lot, even after that big game. And then I'm always going after Nico Collins, because Nico Collins seems to be, is an incredible asset. But a guy that, people aren't really thinking about is Diggs. Diggs is a guy that I'm also going after. So Revan, Lazard with Lazard on your trade block, I think that all of those pieces are definitely role-playing pieces, with JSN being the best chance to kind of be a starter at one point in time. That's kind of my lean on that. Do I trade Devontae for DJ Moore? I don't do that. When it comes to these two players, with Devontae Adams potentially being traded, which we just talked about, and with him potentially, not playing for maybe this week and maybe another week, it's definitely likely that you want to move out of Devontae Adams. If you're moving out of Devontae Adams, I really don't want to move into DJ Moore. I would consider if I can move into Chris Olave. Again, if you're watching this, Chris Olave is not a guy that I'm super high on, but he's getting a decent amount of usage right now. And he's getting better usage, like we talked about week 1, in games that are much closer. So I'd consider moving, if I could, into a Chris Olave. I'd consider moving into a Stephon Diggs if I'm moving Devontae Adams. I would consider moving into George Pickens and a piece maybe. I'd consider moving into Brian Thomas and a piece potentially. I would definitely try to move into Jaden Reed if I can. And also at that same point in time, in that same conversation, if you want to move into a lower kind of value guy at this point in time, you could probably search the waiver wire for a guy like Xavier Legette before moving Devontae Adams. So if it's me and I'm not in a PP, or if you're in a standard league like you said, SJ, I don't think that DJ Moore is really worth it for you, because the amount of targets he's getting is turning into a lot of PPR points, but not a lot of touchdowns, not a lot of movement there, no bonus points in terms of yardage. So if I'm going after, again, like I was saying, if I'm going after players that have that bonus points for yardage kind of thing, I'd be thinking Brian Thomas. I'd be trying to move into a Xavier Worthy. Again, I'm not saying you have to move Adams, but if I'm considering it, I'm moving into Diggs, which is an offense that's moving into the red zone. I'm considering moving into Pickens. The schedule's looking great. Brian Thomas, again, he's getting that downfield threat. And even if I'm in a standard league where bonuses matter, I'd even consider moving Devontae Adams for JMO and a piece. Those are kind of the trades that I'm looking for. I'm absolutely not moving into DJ Moore at all, SJ. I have Ridley for Algier as a waiver one priority because I need a back for JT. Should I drop Odunze for Addison if that first one goes through? Yeah. Revan, to build off what we were saying, Odunze right now, hey, X, hey, Pete, we see you. Hey, Mick. Yeah, they're not. It really isn't that much. So, I mean, when you look at it, Mick, when we were talking about Devontae Adams, people aren't asking a lot. So if Baltimore can manage it, if they could trade Bateman and the second round pick for Devontae
it's
Adams,
not an issue of the compensation. It's an issue of the Raiders being able to absorb the penalties that they're going to have to take for trading.
It's gonna happen this year. When it happens, we don't know. But
this point, I personally don't think it's happening for another 3 weeks. So that's why I would say let's not get down to this question. I wouldn't worry about getting Adams for fantasy points at this point.
For your question here, Revan, I would drop Odunze for Addison. With Keenan Allen back, the usage went down again. It was a weird game script. DeAndre Swift was the highest target earner on the team. I would drop Odunze for Addison.
Yes.
Should I trade Chuba Hubbard for Garrett Wilson? I would try to aim for a different player. Levin, we sat on this question for a little bit. If you've been watching us at all, we're not trading into Garrett Wilson.
Ever.
No matter what I'm giving up, I'm really not trading for Garrett Wilson, because the asset, as you look at it, right, you're looking at Garrett Wilson and you're looking at, where his rankings are on a week-to-week basis. Almost every website's putting him in the top 15 on a week-to-week basis.
But he doesn't do it.
Looking at the schedule coming up, week 7 he plays the Steelers. Week 6 and week 8 divisional games with Buffalo and New England, so that could be nice. Week 10 he plays Arizona. They've been hot garbage. Week 11 they play Indianapolis. So if you did want to trade into Garrett Wilson, a player that I would consider trading into trading out of would be Chuba Hubbard, because Chuba Hubbard, again, is playing great right now. He did this, I believe, last year at some point in time as well. With Jonathan Brooks potentially coming back, we'll see what that looks like for the backfield situation. If I need to go out and get a wide receiver, and Chuba is the piece that gets me into a wide receiver, I do like Garrett Wilson against Arizona week 10, week 11 at Indianapolis. I do like him at Jacksonville week 15 and against the Rams week 16. So there's some matchups there that are really good, and against New England week 8. But again,
the problem is he's going to take you out of the playoff contention on the way there. But when you keep playing him, he doesn't produce.
But I don't really want to trade into him. If I'm trading out of Chuba, guys that I'm looking for might be in the vein of the Deebo Samuels, like I just mentioned about the Diggs and the Pickenses. You could also
and AJ Brown. This is a perfect time. That's a perfect trade for AJ Brown.
Trade into AJ Brown as well. You could try to get some players maybe on the upswing, like Jordan Addison, like we were just talking about. I would not, just because it's the name, I wouldn't move into him, but he does have some weeks that are going to be potential boom weeks. It just depends on what that chemistry is going to look like. SV, who would you rather have rest of the season, Singletary or Moss? I think I'd rather have Zach Moss rest of the season. Our rankings do reflect that out of Zach Moss. When we look at the way that these teams are moving the ball, there are going to be red zone opportunities for both of these running backs. Whether they use those running backs for the red zone opportunities, that's something to be considered. Also, there are other running backs on the Giants as well that are eventually going to be a part of this rotation a little bit more, like Tyrone Tracy, right? So you have these young guys on these teams. You have these young guys on these teams who could end up taking the place of somebody who is more of a veteran if they show a little bit more oomph. So for me, I'm on Zach Moss for the point that I think that as we go through this season, he's going to need to be relied on a little bit more to close out these games for the Bengals. And for the Giants, I don't know if the Giants are going to be closing out many games, right? So that's kind of the discussion that needs to be had about these two running backs. You saw his floor, 24 yards. That's a floor that Devin Singletary is going to go after. Zach Moss can totally get a floor like that too if the game script doesn't favor him. We saw that, I believe, week 3. So as I see it, both of these players are pretty comparable, but I think that I'd rather take the one on what I see as the offense that's better out, with the quarterback play in Joe Burrow. I would rather be associated with the Bengals than I would with the Giants. And I think Moss is the play.
So Bob and I completely disagree about who is about them moving forward. They are not on the same level at all. Zach Moss has firmly set himself in as the back for running in Cincinnati. And he is already on pace with what Mixon was doing. He is going to end up being a top 10 back. Singletary is borderline replacement level player right now. Now, I don't think Tracy is really all that great, but I do believe as the year goes on and the Giants record keeps sinking, that they're going to explore to see what they got with the younger guys, because it's what you have to do. And as a result, Singletary is going to get less and less carries and eventually fade away into not existing, just like what happens during Coco. So I look at this and say, hey, I don't want Singletary at all. And yes, I just pulled a Disney reference on you guys. So I don't want Singletary. I think Moss is going to be a top 10 guy. To me, this isn't even close. And I love seeing Marlon back in the queue. I haven't seen you a couple of weeks, Marlon. Welcome back.
Yeah, Marlon's been here every day. So you
really?
know, when
Marlon, I love you.
You just left early. So when I look at this trade, or when I look up this idea here. So again, SV, it's Zach Moss for us, and you know, the usage will be fine. And especially the thing to consider is that right now they trust Zach Moss more with Joe Burrow's health. And if Joe Burrow's if they need to win this game, Joe Burrow is going to be involved, and Zach Moss is going to be the guy in the game. Whether he gets the looks or not, that's something to be considered, and that's a very important aspect of this running back pool. Is that, like we said, although Chase Brown got those touches in the red zone, you know, if they're losing and they need to catch up, Zach Moss is the guy that's going to be in there. So when I see these two quarterbacks here, Hurts on a bye, do I pick up Fields or Darnold? Now, again, Fields as a passer, if you looked at the beginning of that game, it was not nice. There was a lot of things that were not nice about this game for the Steelers. And, you know, that 300 yards was something that I never thought would happen. And I texted Joe about this because I started Justin Fields in one of my home leagues. It was definitely a scare at first. Again, Dallas's defense is not great right now. It's not great at all. Darnold has been playing basically lights out, just getting, 3-4 touchdowns a game. Plays the Jets this week. I don't really want to involve myself with anybody facing the Jets. So I think that if these are my two decisions, then Fields is my guy. But I would definitely check in to see what the Steelers are deciding to do, because they have said at various points in time at the beginning of the season that Wilson was their guy, and when Wilson was healthy, they would play him.
Well,
so being this,
they said it as actively as the post-game conference on Sunday that was what Tomlin was going to do.
So what I would say is, if I'm considering Fields, because again, Dallas is not playing well, I would consider Fields over Darnold because of the matchup, but I would also be ready to pivot if in fact they decide to start Russell Wilson. I don't.
So James,
Joe thinks they will. I don't think they will, but we'll see what happens. But we won't probably know a little bit more until Friday or Saturday about that.
And James, the bigger question then becomes, what are you looking with this pickup? If you're just looking for a 1 week usage, you can go either way. If you're looking for anything beyond that, I think either way I'd go with Darnold. And here's the bigger part of it is I understand QBs are hard to move, but Darnold's going to have at that point a pretty decent track record. He's going to put up some good value. You could potentially trade Darnold to whoever is in need of a quarterback for next week's buy session and get a piece back. I'm talking about a 2-for-1 upgrade that Fields is going to give you no potential with. We don't really see that tangible of a difference in the projections of what they're going to put up this week anyway. Sure, Fields has a higher potential only because of the running, but James, that's what I would look at. I would look at knowing that there's 4 teams on bye next week that say, hey, give me Darnold. He's also tradable next week. I just want to make sure Darnold's not one of those teams on bye next week.
He is. He's on bye next week.
Oh, he is. Well, then never mind about any of this then.
I will say this. Well, I will say this about Darnold is that, when you go over to Fantasy Pros and you look up, the weekly finishes, his only weekly finish outside the top 10 was week 1. It was weekly finish 13. He's been 4-9-9. So yeah, against the Jets, there is potential for him to kind of backslide a bit. But after that, he faces Detroit, the Rams, Indy, Jacksonville. Those are all matchups that I want to buy into with Sam Darnold. So while I won't pick him up week 5, and people will probably drop him week 6 because of the bye, I'd pick him up before week 7. That's what I would do. I'd pick him up before week 7 if that's the guy I wanted to roll with. But I'd roll Fields out this week out of those 2 guys. Again, check in to make sure he's actually going to be the quarterback that's playing. And that's kind of the long and short of it there. And then pick up Darnold after the bye week 6 or even week 6, because nobody's going to be picking him up and then play him week 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, because all those matchups are going to be really nice quarterback matchups.
Minnesota's going to be a really good team when it's all said and done here.
J-Tube, thanks for sticking around. Kyler for Bowers and DJ Moore. If I'm struggling, his wide receivers are Nico, A.J. Brown, and Reed. Here's what I do. I don't think that Bowers is a piece that you need to add into this. Hey, Avi, welcome. I don't think Bowers is the piece that I need to add into it. Tyson, we haven't forgotten about you. But I would definitely, if I'm moving Kyler, again, the coaching staff is always kind of the blemish on Kyler Murray here, is that if you let Kyler Murray loose, yeah, he's probably going to make a bunch of mistakes, but he can really move the ball down the field. But it doesn't seem like they're allowing that to happen with this coaching staff. So I would consider moving on from Kyler. If I have another quarterback, say a Dak, right? If I have a Dak, I'm willing to move on from Kyler. If I have a Goff level kind of player, I'm willing to move on from Kyler. If I have even if I'm holding on to Jane Daniels, if you have Jane Daniels and Kyler, you're obviously starting Jane Daniels over Kyler.
If you have Daniels, yeah, but we have Kyler's number 5 quarterback rest of the season. I don't want to move him for a crappy Cleveland asset or Chicago asset.
Or
Cleveland asset for that matter too.
J-Tube, if I am moving him, if I'm moving Kyler, I want to move into A.J. Brown or Jaden Reed. I don't think unless you're struggling with tight end, I don't think you need to move into Bowers. But I will say that the piece you should target here, Kyler for A.J. Brown, I think is a
but I think you get A.J. Brown and Bowers given the injury and the bye.
I think that's fair enough to kind of propose. You're giving them a nice quarterback back. You're getting back. And even if you say, hey, can you give me Reed and Bowers for Kyler? They might consider it, but mostly I think they consider A.J. Brown and Bowers because of Reed's great game. I think it's something that you should also consider. And before we go back up to Revan's question here and Praylin as well, sticking on this kind of trading Bowers kind of discussion, do you think trading Bowers for Laporta and Brian Thomas is a good deal? I absolutely think this is a good deal. Again, Laporta has been a victim of circumstance, right? And when you look at these games, they did use Brock Wright last night a decent amount. He seems to, be a good blocker for the most part. He came back when he missed a block. He came back and really turned it in. But again, you're looking at tight ends. The tight end season has been really weird so far. A week 8 finish, a week 33 finish, 17 finish, 22 finish in standard leagues. When we look at PPR leagues, he's 8, 30, 23, 13. These matchups coming down the pipeline, Dallas, Minnesota, Tennessee, Green Bay, all can turn this season around. Again, like I said at the beginning of this season, a guy like Laporta, in order for him to be successful, they're going to have to use him a little bit more in the red zone. They were using J-Mo a little bit more. They're using their running backs a little bit more. So that 10 touchdowns is that kind of that ceiling that we're seeing. But again, we're only 4 games through the season. It's very likely that Sam Laporta puts together at least 6 touchdowns this season. You're buying into a tight end with 0 touchdowns right now, and you're trying. And Bowers, same thing, right? Is the usage for Bowers could go infinitely up if they trade Devontae Adams, but trading out of Bowers to move into Laporta plus Brian Thomas Jr., who looks elite, who's been really good over the last several games, as long as Trevor Lawrence has been getting him the ball. I think that's an amazing trade. Absolutely.
And Tyson, for this second point up before Bob gives shout outs, I want to point out this fact. Last year, Laporta had 6 games in PPR where he was north of 20 points. All of those happened from week 5 on. So we're talking a little bit about guys who take a moment or two to ramp up. You look at this 6 points or 6 between now and week 14. That's what he did last year, and we're pretty much on pace to do the exact same thing again.
Yeah,
I think that you're in a great spot, and Brian Thomas Jr. is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, and it's not like it doesn't feel sexy right now, but again, I traded for Sam Laporta week 2, so that I'm still big on him, especially with the way tight ends have been playing, and that trade is awesome. So Praylin, thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for loving the show. If you like our show, if you like what we're putting out there, like and follow. We're on every week. We try to go on a couple times a week. Would you
Yeah,
trade?
on that note, in addition to clicking like and subscribe, we have the next 2 out. So if you have a question that hits you in the middle of the night that says, hey, I need to tell these guys about it, put it in the comments now for the question above. Will be the first thing that gets answered in the upcoming replay, because that's how we're going about answering. It's Bob's murdering bugs. We're murdering bad concepts of fantasy football.
There's been a little fruit fly in this room all day, and it's been bothering me, and I haven't been able to get it. Would I trade Metcalf and Waddle for Tyreek? I have Dobbs on my bench in a 2-flex league, no defense, no kicker. I like 2-flex leagues. I don't really like playing kickers, but I do understand that, with this year especially, kickers have been crazy. Would I do this trade? I wouldn't.
No.
I don't think. Here's the thing. Metcalf right now, like I said, there are certain players that I would want to trade into Tyreek Hill with, and I'd want to trade out of Tyreek Hill with certain other players. This is the type of trade that if I were offered it and I had Tyreek Hill, I would accept it, because Metcalf has been playing really exceptionally well, and there's no reason to say that he's not. Waddle, for me, when Tua comes back, this Waddle versus Tyreek kind of thing is always kind of on the agenda. But both of them right now, this point, with what Tyler Huntley put out on the field, it's going to be hard to start either of them right now. So as long as Tyler Huntley's on the field, Tyreek does have the potential to get you over north of 20 points, right? But I don't think it's not likely to happen. And that's the same thing goes for Waddle. If I was trading to get Tyreek Hill, I probably wouldn't include DK Metcalf, and I might try to move a different piece, especially in a 2-flex league. I don't want to be trading one premier wide receiver and one could be premier wide receiver when the dust settles. That's just how I feel about this, especially in a 2-flex league.
And here's the other part about it, is that the exact moment Tyreek Hill becomes worth owning, so does Waddle. So why do you want to handcuff yourself back, taking a starter off of your roster, knowing that they're going to both tick off on the exact same moment? I'm just against this one. I'm in general, I'm big on picking up Tyreek, but it's not in this situation.
Yeah, and we see all the questions down here. We'll get to all of them. Absolutely. So coming down here, Praylin, you're 4-0 for context, which is great. And he's 1-3. I don't know if Tyreek will be good in long-term. Wanted your take on it. Yeah, that's definitely how we feel on Tyreek. If you're 4-0, so you could stomach getting Tyreek back and still be okay 3 or 4 weeks from now and be 5-2 or something like that, right? But when I look at what I'm giving up, like Joe said, the instant that Tyreek becomes valuable again, Waddle will also become valuable again. Metcalf is valuable right now, and you're 4-0 probably for a reason, and one of those reasons is DK Metcalf. Again, playing out.
Yeah, the other part is there's going to be someone else in your league who's suffering and struggling. If you do that exact same trade for Chase, we're on the bus with it. It's Tyreek. It just isn't the big enough picture. Find someone else who's struggling. We love 2-1s where you're getting the best player in the deal.
I mean, you
just don't believe that Tyreek's big enough of an upgrade in this one.
If you don't own CeeDee Lamb, this would be the kind of conversation starter that I'd throw out for CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying it will get accepted, but it's a conversation starter. And that's kind of just how it is sometimes, right? Revin, do I hold the Chiefs D or drop for the Broncos, Seahawks, Vikings, Patriots? When we look at this week's schedule, like I said, I think that Denver is a definitely my DFS pick because of the way that they're valued this week in terms of DFS lineups. When it comes to the Vikings
have the Jets. It's going to be in a dome. It's not going to be horrendous as last week. I know the Vikings have a very good defense.
They do. They blitz a lot.
But Seattle is playing the Giants. The Giants cannot score a touchdown. It's a giant flight. I get Seattle's on the short week, but I look there as a go-to spot as my second one.
I'm not on.
And I love New England this week. I mean, it's going to be cold. It's going to be cold. Miami's reeling, and especially if Mostert isn't playing, I think New England's the pick.
Yeah, I go Broncos, Patriots, Vikings, Seahawks. I don't think Seahawks are starters because most of their starters are hurt. So I'm not on Seahawks at all. I'm on Broncos and Patriots in that order. And I think, like Joe said, the Dolphins are reeling.
They are.
The Patriots also not that great. So
if you look at the lines, Miami is projected, and no one would have thought this day one. Miami is projected to score the least amount of points in football this year based upon the current betting lines. It's crazy. Yeah. It's absolutely crazy.
It's really rough, actually. So, George, coming down here, should I trade Zay Flowers for Amari Cooper? If Amari gets traded to a team that's relevant, I could see him having good value. But again, he's dealing with those dropsies.
He's not a good player. Zay Flowers is a better player.
I don't know right now if I'd want to do that. If I were moving Zay, I'd want to move into Brian Thomas Jr. I think you have Brian Thomas Jr. though. And if I were moving Zay, I'd want to try to move into Diggs. You may or may not have Diggs. I can't remember. But
pair him with the back end running back and upgrade. Mm-hmm. Don't do a lateral move, which is really a down move to Cooper. Cooper is significantly worse than Zay Flowers, both in fantasy and in real life.
Yeah, and when it comes to your recon, you don't want the trade to get vetoed, and so
don't worry about that.
And so
don't ever worry about a trade getting vetoed. If you two agree on it, you do it.
But again, with a guy being a rookie in the league, people will think you're taking advantage. So you do want to kind of propose a fair enough trade offer. But I know that the trade offer Joe gave to you is something to consider. Guys that I would want off that team: DK, MHJ, Brian Robinson, Addison, JSN. Those are the players that I'd want from his team. And I think you have some valuable pieces that you could move to get some of those guys for the long run of the season.
I'd start with DK.
T.I., Ayuk, Garrett, ETN for MHJ and Brees. Am I giving up? Matthew, welcome. We'll get to your question. Javi, we see you there. Tarnan, we see you as well. If I'm giving up Ayuk, Garrett, and ETN to move into MHJ and Brees, I would consider it. It's really tough because I really want to like ETN. But again, he went off on the sidelines last week with an injury, or this past week with an injury. Garrett Wilson's a guy that I do want to trade out of, even though there are going to be a couple games down the pipeline. There's going to be about 4 or 5 games where he's probably going to go off for about 20 points or so.
But there's more for Harrison.
And Ayuk is in a similar position. So if I'm trading away Ayuk, Garrett Wilson, and ETN, I think if I'm getting back MHJ and Brees, even though Brees, again, monsoon game, but also the past 2 weeks, he's been getting his usage cut into by Braylon Allen, which isn't nice for a guy that we thought was going to be the guy. I think that it's fair enough that this trade is something that I would want to think about moving into. Again, everybody is worried about Breece Hall. But like you said, Joe, the week was rough. It was a rough week. There's no doubt about it. But the last 2 weeks prior to that, still over 50 yards, still getting a lot of receptions. They're going to use him. I have no problem with that. It's a nice week to buy low on Breece Hall if you can. I don't think you're buying low, but I think you're getting a fair enough offer. Ayuk, Garrett, and ETN for MHJ and Breece. I think I would float that out there. I don't think that gets accepted, but I would definitely float that out there.
I'd definitely take I would take that trade getting Harrison Jr.
Marlon, I feel you. I really do, and Joe feels you too.
Marlon, I'm in the same boat as you. Here's how I'm fighting around it. I'm trying to get AJ Brown as quickly as possible. I'm trying to trade. In that case, I'm actually trading Breece. But the guy I'm targeting is Harrison. I'm also trying to target Minko. And then if I can't get that, it's then Metcalf and Brown. Those are the 4 that I'm looking with my various assets to be able to move to be able to get in one of those departments to overcome the Rishi downturn.
Yeah, and Marlon, it really depends on who you want to trade. I mean, I know some people just traded into Rashee Rice last week. I mean, I shared the story about trading into Derrick Henry 1 year and trading out of Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams exploded. Derrick Henry breaks his leg. So, it all happens and it's terrible. But what I would do is if and Marlon, you could post your team in the chat again, just to help us remember a little bit. And Ti said, yeah, he's trading away Garrett and Etienne and Ayuk. Yeah, I'd do that. I think that there's value. I think that there's value enough in both of those players, even though you're getting the two players back in that deal that have major coaching concerns. So that's something to consider, but those players are elite players. And
Marvin Harrison Jr. is above coaching concerns.
Like we said yesterday, when I believe Darkside brought it up as well, is that, coaching matters. Elite players matter. But what I said yesterday is that good coaches can make average players look great, and great coaches can make everybody look amazing, and bad coaches can make great players look average. But
superstars overcome it all, and that's why Marvin Harrison is still away.
So if I'm trying to move and trying to get some guys to replace Rashee Rice, nobody's really going to realistically replace Rashee Rice. But you're probably going to have to make something up from the waiver wire. I would take a look to see if Jordan Addison's still on the waiver wire. I'd look to see if Hawk is on the waiver wire, if I have the ability to add him to the bench to kind of just make up some points on the back end here at some point in time. I would also start targeting Mike Evans. I would start seeing if
Evans is a good one because he started slow.
If I'm a Deontay Johnson owner, I'd see if I can maybe move Deontay and a piece into Evans. Maybe think about moving into a Brian Thomas Jr. Again,
long story short, Marlon, send us out the rest of your team so we can start moving stuff
into Chase. There's a lot of players to move into. The one thing that I don't want to move into is any Broncos. I'm not moving into any Broncos, and I'm not really moving unless I'm getting a JT or something like that. I'm not really moving into any Colts either.
So guys, we realized that question was asked a half an hour ago and we just got to it. We will get to all your questions. I promise we will get to all of them before we turn off. We will be with you all.
So Mick, the compensation, like Joe and I talked about when it comes to Devontae Adams. And speaking of Devontae Adams, realistically, right, Joe, is that if Devontae Adams were to leave, Trey Tucker's had 2 good games in a row. Jacoby Myers is going to be relevant. I think if you haven't yet, I would start looking and seeing where Trey Tucker is on my waiver wire, and I would even start adding him to my bench. He's a guy that's getting usage with Devontae Adams being down. And while it's not super fantastic all the time, garbage time usage in week 3, real usage in week
garbage 4. Time pays the bills, baby.
I mean, that's nice. So I would start thinking about if I'm struggling at wide receiver, trying to pick up some of those back ends. Again, Wan'Dale is a great kind of weekly filling in spot with the amount of targets that he's been getting. I don't know if those targets are going to continue to come, but there's no reason to think that they're not going to be there the way that they've been playing like they've been playing. So X, looking to trade for a running back 2. My running backs are CMC, Achane, Dowdle, Charbonnet, and Ty Chandler. My wide receivers are T. Higgins, Deontay, Amari, BTJ, Waddle. Start Dowdle and stay put, or trade for a running back 2, Jordan, Mason. I don't think you can get Mason. If you're moving Mason, or if you're trying to get Mason, you're probably going to have to move out of Achane and out of BTJ or something like that. For me, though, where I'm at on your team, there's a lot of things on your team that are a little bit concerning to me right now, knowing injuries and things are happening. Achane could be a 5-point week, could be a 15-point week, most likely a 5. You're looking at Charbonnet with Kenny Walker back. Who knows what that role will look like? It could be complimentary, and I thought it was going to be complimentary this past week, but Kenny Walker did get a lot of carries. T. Higgins is not kind of the
Higgins needs to get traded.
T. Higgins is not the guy that I really want as my wide receiver 1. So if it were me right now, what I would try to do is something like this, X.
No, you don't want Amari either. Oh my God, dude, this is rough.
Here's what I would do. And it's a very simple thing to kind of float around. Start seeing which teams could benefit from Achane. See which teams could potentially benefit from T and Amari. And this is what I would start doing. I would start looking at seeing if those 3 players would benefit the teams that have Brian Robinson Jr. I would see if I would go after the Aaron Jones owner. I keep saying that over and over again. The schedule looks great. If the guy stays healthy, it's going to be great. You have Ty Chandler there sitting as the backup in case anything happens. If you go after Aaron Jones right here, you could probably do something like this. Let's move T. Higgins, Amari, and Achane. You can move them in any deal that you want. You could probably go out there, float Achane right now, today, and you could probably move Achane and move him in to a James Cook plus a piece. I don't know what that piece will be, but you can move Cook into Achane and a piece. Or you can move Achane into Cook and a piece.
Yeah, exactly.
I can take T and Amari.
Or T in that new piece.
Or the new piece, and I can move into a David Montgomery. Or I can move into a David Montgomery plus a Dontavian Wicks or something like that. Ideally, what you're thinking here is, and a lot of our viewers know this, is that if you're doing one trade, you can definitely do one trade to do another trade, right? So if you're looking and you see like weaknesses on another team, you could definitely think about working through those weaknesses. Again,
we're not going to sugarcoat this. You're 4 trades away from winning a league. At least 4 trades away with this current roster. Dottle, Achane, Amari, and Higgins will not be on a winning team. So you need to get rid of all 4 of them and upgrade. We've been giving you a lot of players throughout this episode.
Hey,
I'm really high on AJ Brown because this is about as cheap as you'll ever be able to get him. He is a stud number 1 you can build around.
And X, it really depends on your record too. So, I mean, if you're going
those 4 players will not be on a championship team. Maybe Achane.
If I'm looking at your team, I'm thinking you're maybe 1-3 or 2-2. That's what I would do. And maybe even this. I would trade Achane and maybe move him into a Jaden Reed and a Zach Moss. Something like that could be something to think about as well. It solidifies you, and then you can move on from Amari. Maybe you float Amari, and maybe you don't want to move T. Higgins. And maybe you float Amari and see if you can move into, a JSN, someone with like some upward swing. Again, Amari does have that opportunity that if he catches those touchdowns, it's a big if he caught those touchdowns, he would have been like wide receiver 12 on the week. So he's not that far off. But the problem is he didn't. And that's a trend for Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper does drop passes. Deshaun Watson.
And the weather's only getting worse.
Deshaun Watson doesn't look great. So yes, Amari could put up that 50-point bomb. But again, at this point in time, I'm not starting Amari over BTJ, Deontay, and T. Higgins. I'm just
you definitely have to get rid of Amari before the end of this week, because next week he plays Philly. And you won't be able to get anything for him there because
that's kind of
Watson will get sacked like crazy.
And also, you could probably move into a Chris Olave with the kind of players that you have right now. You could probably move Amari and T into and sell that upwards potential and move into a Chris Olave and maybe backdoor yourself into I'm not saying I want this player right now. You might be able to backdoor yourself into a backdoor Ramondre Stevenson for the owner that's frustrated with that. But definitely my targets would be Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is my primary target if I'm going after a running back. Aaron Jones is the guy that I want to be my running back 2 or my running back 1 right now with CMC down, right? Aaron Jones is a guy that I want to go after. I can definitely get him with the players that I have there. I can definitely go after and get a lot of players. You just have to kind of float it around. When we come on tomorrow, X, just drop some rosters from your league, and we can definitely talk more about that. Pete, should I give up the 3rd highest waiver spot and try to get Leggett? I wouldn't. It's definitely something to think about because the 3rd highest waiver spot isn't great. You want
it probably becomes the number 1 waiver spot in 2 weeks, though.
It probably becomes the number 1 waiver spot after this week with Dontavian Wicks probably being pulled off if he wasn't already on a roster, being pulled off of waiver 1 this week. Jawan Jennings was waiver 1 last week, most likely, and somebody will probably use a waiver claim on Fields. So you're probably going to be waiver priority 1 by next week. Once waivers
But
clear.
doing a waiver 3 on Wicks isn't bad though.
But I do think that Leggett does have value. It just depends on how you view Andy Dalton long term. If you view Andy Dalton as a 2-touchdown guy long term, he could be that this week. Xavier Leggett's going to have some play. With Thielen, with being down potentially 4 weeks, this past week, Xavier Leggett definitely has a possibility. Looking at the Carolina Panthers schedule here, Joe, let's pull up.
So Carolina has Chicago this week at Chicago.
Love that.
Then home
Falcons.
against the Atlanta Falcons.
And the Commanders. Love that.
At Washington.
And Broncos.
At Denver. So next 3 weeks, there's not exactly for the number 2 receiver. You love the at Denver. Like I said, he's got a very manageable passing game schedule on the horizon. My biggest problem with Leggett is that
sure.
Right? I don't want you planning on starting Leggett. It is the fundamental fact. It's still a very bad offense, guys. Like, just because we had 2 flash in the pans doesn't mean this is now going to be a good offense. It's not.
But we're not. But here's the thing, Joe. I'm not, when I look at a guy like Xavier Leggett, when I look at the Carolina Panthers, I'm not expecting Carolina to win games or be great at anything. But
no, I get it. I don't think I expect consistently 12 points out of Leggett. I don't see them scoring enough touchdowns.
But what I'm looking for is, are they playing defenses that are going to allow yardage to happen? And when it comes to a guy like Xavier Leggett, if he's given the opportunity and say he gets 40, 50 yards, there could be that touchdown on the horizon for him.
Mm-mm.
If I have to play Xavier Leggett, it's for a bye week fill-in. I think he's an acceptable bye week.
Xavier Leggett is going to give you 12 yards on a 3rd and 15. And that's what he's going to give you game. But he's never going to give you. He got lucky and got the touchdown this week. It's not something you can say. I believe that this is trying to believe there's more in that can than there is with Leggett.
But again,
let's put it this way. Next year, at best, he is an 8th round draft pick in a 12-man league. It's not worth getting.
But again, I'm not trading, or I'm not
excited about. He's not the future.
He's
the future of Carolina, but he's not the future.
Yeah, I'm not going out there and spending a waiver 3 priority on Xavier Leggett. I think that if he clears waivers and he ends up free agency, I'm all for that. I think that he's worth picking up, but I don't know if I use a waiver priority on him. You traded Garrett Wilson and Quentin Johnson for DJ Moore and Ferguson in 14-man league. And you did remember we told you about Wilson. So, kudos to you, man. You look at it and, Quentin Johnson did have a good game 2 weeks ago, I believe. But going into DJ Moore and Ferguson in a 14-man league and getting out of Wilson, you're getting a solid tight end. Knowing that tight ends have been struggling drastically this year. Knowing that that they've been struggling this year, and you have a tight end that could potentially finish top 5 on a week-to-week basis, that's gold.
I think you just got to keep working, and now you got to move DJ. I really think that's your answer. Personally, I've mentioned this earlier in the show. I'd want to look at moving Kamara as it is, because I think you have him at his absolute peak right now, and moving him into another top flight running back using DJ Moore as the justifier is how I would go about that.
Yeah.
Kamara,
if you have
someone like that.
If you have a running back that, the production could fade off at the end of the season, I definitely think about moving that running back plus DJ Moore to move into something really nice. I think that owning DJ Moore and Ferguson is much better than owning Garrett Wilson right now.
Here's another thing you could do. You could spin DJ Moore right now and try to talk the guy into who owns JT in the fear of JT being out a while. You stash JT because DJ Moore is not a significant upgrade over your current receivers. If you're only playing 2 of them, that is. He's not a significant upgrade over those 2. I would really do that. Stash JT then, and the next thing you know, boom, you're walking around winning championships with Kamara and JT.
And then Jay here, would you rather have Cup or Ayuk if you're 1-3? Cup is supposed to return in 2 weeks.
Ayuk.
Yeah, I think right now, because Ayuk's playing, I'd rather have Ayuk. You need to win games now. But Cup's nice. But sitting at 1-3, it's hard to take on anybody that's injured. So if you're going out there and trying to get Cup, I'm only getting Cup if I'm 3-1, 4-0. Unless I only lost because of playing the top team in a given week. If I'm solid in points production, like Joe said earlier in the episode, Cup's a valid point to go out and get. But I think that I'd rather have Ayuk over Cup right now, but that will probably change.
I'd rather have A.J. Brown over Cup as well.
Looking to trade for a running back. Starters are Mahomes, Eckler, Moss, Lamb, Nico, Bowers. Love that. Godwin. Bench is Jennings, Njoku, Debo. Love that. Zamir White, Pacheco. That's unfortunate.
You certainly need the running back. There's no doubt about that.
So
I would probably be looking at Eckler plus.
No, this is what you do.
Probably Jennings, I guess, to try to upgrade that spot. That's all I would do.
Although
Eckler's hurt. How are you going to do with that?
You trade out of Mahomes. What you do
I don't know about that.
Is you take Mahomes, you take looking at who you have, you take Mahomes and you take either Godwin or Debo, whoever you value less.
Godwin.
Whichever one you value less in the short term versus the long term here, you can decide how you'd like, Javi. But what I would do is I would trade out of Patrick Mahomes. I would look at the guys in my league. Again, just looking at rosters and stuff. Let me pull up the rankings here in terms of quarterbacks here. I would look at the guys that are maybe struggling with unsatisfactory quarterback production or inconsistent quarterback production, right? And I would go and I'd probably maybe look to the Kyler owner and I'd say, okay, you have Kyler Murray. You might be a little bit frustrated with Kyler Murray. Here's Patrick Mahomes. The connection to Travis Kelce is great. Here's also Chris Godwin. Look on his team. Guys that I'm looking for in trades like this are going to be your James Cookses, your David Montgomerys as running backs back in return. I'm also thinking about, looking at Aaron Jones and Josh Jacobs as two running backs also to get back. What I'm seeing here is the guy that you want to replace is Eckler. Moss, I think, is good enough right there as an RB2 that you don't have to work into replacing him. But what I want to say about Patrick Mahomes and why I say he's worth trading is that Patrick Mahomes is strictly average as a fantasy quarterback this year. I don't think that we're going to get too many 30-point games out of Patrick Mahomes in the future. While he's still, legendary status type of quarterback, I think that his numbers could easily be replaced on a week-to-week basis by like Dak, Baker, even a Sam Darnold, who might or might not be on the waiver wire right now in your league. So if I were you, I might, because the Kyler owner definitely doesn't want to drop Kyler and definitely is thinking about benching Kyler because of the way that the coaching staff has been treating this offense.
Assuming he's paying attention enough.
That's definitely something to look into. You're also targeting the Anthony Richardson owner, right? Anthony Richardson owner dealing with an injury. You say, I will give you Patrick Mahomes and Chris Godwin. I don't want Anthony Richardson back. I'm not saying getting Anthony Richardson back. I'm saying you just straight up trade away Patrick Mahomes and Godwin, and you pick up. And Javi, I need to know.
Pick up their number one running back. I got you. That part can make sense because that Richardson guy's going to be desperate.
Waivers. We would need to know who's on your waivers, of course, Javi, to kind of make sense out of that. But when you look at the teams that are struggling right now, the Anthony Richardson owner wants a quarterback. He probably went out on the waiver wire, maybe skulked the waiver wire, picked up Andy Dalton or Sam Darnold or Fields. You also might want to go after whoever has Trevor Lawrence. And, Trevor Lawrence is like, it's not great, but the matchup's good this week.
Yeah, the guys who are disappointed at quarterback. And then you're taking their number one running back.
And you don't need to get a quarterback back. But if you do, you could go after and say, like, hey, give me Goff and Cook and your lineup instantly gets basically 1,000% better because the
It
amount
does.
that Goff can put up is also the same amount of points that Mahomes is putting up on a week-to-week basis. Mahomes is a trade. He's an absolute
That's
trade.
fair. I like the direction you took that one, Bob.
Granted, he could throw up 30 points. I just don't see it being likely because in order to do that, he's going to have to throw for 4 to 5 touchdowns. And he can use his legs, but I don't think his legs are going to be the thing that gets him the points. And it's going to have to be 4 or 5 passing touchdowns with 400, 500 yards. And with the set of wide receivers they have, that's not in the cards anymore.
That's true. And I really think we were past the era of Mahomes running like crazy.
Yeah,
Like
so
he's past that in his career.
those are the guys I would target because the quarterback play is still kind of shoddy for Kyler Murray. It's very shoddy for Anthony Richardson. Mahomes would be considered for them.
And not to mention
upgrade
any of the
away.
bye guys this week. You got the Hurts guy would be looking into that.
Matthew, we see you. Let's talk to Revin first, and then Matthew will Matthew and All in One and KJ will get to your questions. So Revin, trying to trade for Diggs, I offered DJ Moore and Jason. I know he likes Shakir. If he counters DJ Moore and Shakir for Diggs, would you do it? I think it's a little much.
I want a piece back. Yeah.
I would consider it if he says DJ Moore and Shakir. And you want Diggs. I'd maybe say, okay, give me Diggs. And, I know we've been talking a lot about Wandale, but give me back Diggs and let's say.
Whatever his flex number 2 is basically the value you'd be looking at.
Yeah. You'd probably be getting back like a Diggs, Tyler Lockett kind of thing. Revin, I know you mentioned your team above a little bit earlier. Even, and this is another thing to think about too, Revin. I know that we're off on Garrett Wilson, but a guy that might be really nice ramping up in the short term here could be Mike Williams. Watch out for him. I'm not saying roster him right now, but he's a guy to keep my eye on because the usage last week was nice. If he comes back being healthy, he's definitely a threat on that offense, and it could be nice. Trey Tucker's another guy with, if you're just looking for some waiver guys to maybe get back on that back end with Diggs. But I think it's pretty fair with the way that Diggs has been playing and the way that DJ Moore has been playing. Shakir should be enough to kind of elevate you into that Diggs. I do think it's a little much. I do have Shakir ranked pretty high on the weekly basis. And for me, DJ Moore and Diggs are around that same kind of level, same kind of tier. So it is a little much to give up, but I definitely want something on the back end back with that, Revin. Matthew, should I trade Pittman? Yeah. And if so, who should I try and aim for in a package with Mostert? I need a running back. He's in a 16-man super flex. Rodgers, Cousins, B-Rob, Mostert, Garrett Wilson, Kupp, Pittman, Shakir, Jennings, Pitts, 3-1, not sure what to do. Here's how I'd approach it, and then, Joe, you can share kind of your thoughts on this. Is that if I'm trading Pittman and if I'm in a 16-man super flex, I really don't want to trade out of Mostert right now. I think that
because you sat through the worst part, right?
You sat through the worst part of Mostert. Again, I'm trading out of Achane for the right price. Mostert is pennies on the dollar, so you're not getting the right price back for Mostert right now. Pitts is a non-start. Unfortunately, you're in a 16-man super flex, and you kind of have to start him. With it being a super flex, you're also starting Rodgers and Cousins on a weekly basis. So I get the reason why you have Garrett Wilson there. What I would try to do with the games that are better ahead for Garrett Wilson, you're 3-1, so you don't necessarily have to make a deal right now. But if you want to go after a running back right now, the pieces that you're probably going to have to do, and I'm just going to name a couple of running backs that I think are worth it right now. And we've been talking about it a lot of the episode. I think it's worth it to go after a guy like Bucky Irving. I think it's worth it to go after James Cook still. I think it's also worth it to go after Aaron Jones. The James Cook owner is probably going to be pretty frustrated, just as frustrated as you are. And maybe with Flacco playing potentially, he might want to sell Pittman, and you might have to sell Jennings and move them into there. I think that a guy that you could target, because again, like Mostert, the owner has sat through the worst of it with Joe Mixon. He's a guy to kind of think about and target. When it comes to a 16-man,
I don't have Mostert than the Mixon though. Just putting that out there.
When it comes to a 16-man super flex, I think that going after, especially because it's 16-man, going after a guy like Justice Hill. Justice Hill probably won't cost a lot of money. It immediately gets you into he's a flex play in some leagues right now. He gets you into
he will be in this league. You could probably do Jennings for Hill.
He gets into a starter right now. If it were me right now, what I would try to do is maybe see if I can trade Pittman to the Justice Hill owner, trade Pittman for Justice Hill, and try to get back a tight end, maybe a Tucker Kraft as a tight end. Maybe you can move into Evan Ingram when he gets a little bit healthier. Also thinking about trying to move into a Jake Ferguson or a Pat Freiermuth. In a 16-man league, Tucker Kraft is definitely going to be owned. Njoku's going to be owned. Guys that are probably not owned, Tyler Conklin. Would I want him? I don't know. Also, for the back end of this, Matthew, if you need a tight end, maybe not in the short term, but maybe in the long term, looking after a guy like Noah Gray from Kansas City.
Noah Gray's the guy we talked up yesterday.
Those are guys that think about. I'd target.
You could do Jennings for Noah Gray right now, and it would upgrade your team.
Well, I wouldn't do that, but I would consider even going after the guy who owns Mark Andrews, Matthew. And you can talk a little bit more about this too, Matthew, if you have any more details. If I am packaging Pittman with Mostert, I would want back a pretty good return. I'm not willing to give up on Mostert yet. Like Joe said, he sat through the worst of it with Mostert. If it were me, I'm most likely trying to move Pittman and Pitts, target the Ferguson owner, target the Mark Andrews owner, and while you won't get a tight end back, listen. Well, you're not going to want Mark Andrews back. You don't need Mark Andrews back. You can probably cobble together another tight end because tight ends have been so bad. You could probably put Kyle Pitts to the Mark Andrews owner. You could probably then put Pittman to that Mark Andrews owner, and you could say, okay, I want your running back too. And that for the most part will probably.
So you're basically telling him to do two trades here.
Yeah,
give Pitts to the guy who has Andrews, and then go get a tight end after the fact.
And I'm moving, like I said, I'm moving into you're not going to get the top end flight guys, but realistically speaking, I'm moving into the Aaron Joneses. I'm trying to move into the Jacobses. Maybe you can even get a Swift. Even though I don't see a lot of value right there, in a 16-man league, he does have value. You could definitely move into a Zach Moss. You can move into a Bucky Irving, who has some long-term value down on the backside. And Justice Hill has some short-term and some long-term value, depending on a lot of different things. So definitely check your waiver wire out, Matthew. And we can talk more tomorrow and in a couple of days as well. Is Mostert droppable for Chase Brown? I wouldn't. I would see if I have somebody else on my roster to drop for Chase Brown. Guys I would consider dropping for Chase Brown would be Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, Zamir White. I would definitely think about dropping. Wide receivers I'd think about dropping for Chase Brown, although I'd try to trade them before I drop them, would be a guy like Kelvin Ridley. I would try to move on from Jerry Jeudy if I needed to. If I'm still rostering Brandon Cooks, I'm jumping off Brandon Cooks in a heartbeat for Chase Brown. Those are if I have Curtis Samuel, I'm dropping Curtis Samuel for Chase Brown. Those are all guys that I think are worth dropping for Chase Brown. I don't think Mostert is worth dropping for Chase Brown.
And that's true.
Should I drop Juwan Jennings for Wicks or Trey Tucker full PPR? I'd consider it, but Juwan Jennings still got, with Debo back for the game one, I'm willing to wait a week on Juwan Jennings to see how the performance is with all the offensive players minus CMC in. Because say Ayuk were to go out or Debo were to go out again, that's something to consider.
Yeah.
These two guys that you mentioned, though, KJ, are totally 1,000% two of my targets this week if I need to play the waiver wire.
Just cut someone else.
Trey Tucker is one of the people in the short and the long term that's probably going to have value, knowing that Devontae Adams wants to be off this team. So he's definitely a guy I keep my eye on, but I don't know if I drop Jennings for him. Again, guys that I'd think about dropping for Wicks and Tucker would be Gabe Davis. I would think about dropping, like I said, Cooks. If you choose that you want to move on from Alec Pierce, it's definitely worth considering. If you're rostering Josh Reynolds in a deep league, worth considering. If you're rostering Rashad Bateman, definitely worth considering. If you're rostering Jacoby Myers, I wouldn't drop Jacoby yet, but he's something to think about there.
Jacoby is concerning me, but again, the opportunity is there. So Bob, you did great list there. KJ, I just think the bottom line is don't get rid of him yet. I just got offered Pittman and Pollard for don't do it. Debo is so much better than both of them.
Yeah, I'd consider countering with that, Javi. When we look at what you threw at us before here with Mahomes, Eckler, Moss, Lamb, Nico, Bowers, Godwin, you have Debo there, you have Jennings there. I would definitely consider. You need
okay. You do that Godwin instead. I'm on board with it now. I'm on board with that now. If it's Godwin instead of Debo,
I think I'd do that because you're gonna start Debo over Pittman. I think right now, unless Flacco plays, maybe even if Flacco plays, I would definitely consider that. But I would try what I was saying to you about Mahomes earlier, because I think that there is still some value there. And I don't think that Mahomes is going to crest that 28, 29 points that some of these quarterbacks have been getting to be the weekly number one quarterback. When we look at and just going back to Patty Mahomes, this is a trade that I would do. I would do Pittman and Pollard for Godwin. I'd try to get a little bit more maybe for Godwin because he is playing still great. When I look at Patrick Mahomes' finishes in all of the weeks so far, and this is coming from Fantasy Pros, right, is when we look at his finishes through the first 4 weeks of the season, quarterback 14, quarterback 14, quarterback 15, quarterback 17.
Consistent.
In a one quarterback league, that's not worth starting.
No, it's not, but it's still consistent.
So welcome South. SS, should I do this trade? Give Pollard and Lazard, receive Garrett Wilson and Swift. Man, I'm kind of worried because Pollard's usage has been off the charts, but it's still Garrett Wilson. What do you think? I don't do that. If I wanted to move, the reason this was proposed to you was probably because this owner is getting frustrated with Wilson's usage, is seeing the usage of Alan Lazard is basically the same, if not better, than Garrett Wilson's usage. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to capitalize on Swift's great game and trying to get into Tony Pollard. I don't do this trade at all. Swift will most likely come down to earth. There's a chance that he has a couple good games, like I said, here or there, and is a nice back-end piece on a trade. I would do that, but he's a primary piece in this trade, and I don't think I would do that. Pollard, like Joe said a couple episodes ago, Pollard is going to have a time where he does trail off. But right now, he's doing really well. And right now, the schedule, just looking at Tennessee's schedule on the back on this side here, and especially knowing that the quarterback situation is a little bit unsettled. You have Indy after the bye, Buffalo, Detroit, who proved that they do have a good enough defense, but they couldn't stop Ken Walker. New England, Chargers could be a tough matchup. Minnesota will be a tough matchup. Houston should be okay. Washington, Jacksonville, week 13 and 14. I think I'm keeping Pollard. And if I wanted to get a wide receiver, I'm not looking to move into Garrett Wilson. I get what you're thinking. There are going to be some great games for Garrett Wilson on the horizon. But just like I said about Alan Lazard, those great games for Garrett Wilson could easily
are probably not happening in a Jets uniform.
Those games could easily also be great games for Alan Lazard and games for Mike Williams. I don't give up Pollard for this deal at all, SS. So originally I was looking at trading Pittman and Mostert and a draft pick for a guy like James Conner and Josh Jacobs, but all the guys in my leagues are bums. I like the idea of Bucky. Yeah, Bucky's a guy it could cost you a bit right now, but I think it's worth going after and getting a guy like Bucky. It's even worth going after and getting a guy like Tank Bigsby as well. The usage is
No
sound,
problem,
but
SS.
not on the field.
Matthew, the other part with this is that when we have experience with other guys that are like that, they want name brands. And you just heard everything we just said about Garrett Wilson, which is 100% true. Try doing Garrett Wilson and Rodgers as two name brandy guys as you can get and do a quarterback exchange there with another great one. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that's another good idea, Matthew, to think about. You're in a super flex. Obviously, 16 teams. You're running really low at some quarterback situations. As I look at it, all these quarterbacks are most likely rostered. So, if we come in and we look at these rankings, if it were me, right, and I was willing to trade Aaron Rodgers, or I was willing to trade Kirk Cousins and try to get something back, I would be talking to the person. I would be talking to the person that owns Jared Goff. Jared Goff's going to be tough to get you out on a Superflex league, but I'd be talking to the guy that owns Jared Goff. I'd be talking to the guy that owns Geno Smith as well, and seeing if I can get a better positional standpoint from that perspective. You're welcome, SS. We appreciate you. South, who'd you pick off waivers for week 5? Wicks, Swift, or Addison? Is Addison 1,000%, followed by Wicks and Swift. Addison is the ad of the week for us if he's on your waiver wire. Addison is the ad of the week if he's on your waiver wire. He shouldn't be on your waiver wire, but I can understand with the injuries in a low, if you have a less amount of space on your roster, I can understand why Addison would be there. Addison 100% for us, followed by Wicks and then Swift. Swift if you need a running back, but Addison and Wicks if you need anything else. All in one. What about Ford, Higgins, Waddle, or Pacheco? I'm down bad. Need to see who I can pick up in waivers first. So all in one, when I look at your team, I know it sounds sacrilegious, but I would drop Ford right now for Chase Brown. I think Chase Brown has better prospects than Ford. So if it were me, I would drop Ford for Chase Brown. I would definitely do that. I wouldn't drop Higgins. I wouldn't drop Waddle. If I were trying to trade any of those guys right now, all in one, and we're going to be on tomorrow as well, so we can talk more about this tomorrow. If I were to trade any of those guys, I'd move on from Higgins as well. I'd try to pair Higgins and Ford for somebody else. Pacheco, unfortunately, is kind of a hold, but if you can trade him, I don't think he's going to have any value this year. But if you can trade him for something good, or unless you have an IR spot, he's kind of a drop, unless we see something playing out differently in terms of health. Leonardo, trade DK for Pittman and Ramondre? No, absolutely not. When it comes to Pittman, again, we've been talking a lot about Pittman here. When it comes to Pittman is only worth it if Flacco is playing. If Richardson is playing, Pittman is not worth it. DK is on fire right now. Only do this trade if you think you need a running back. Right now, Ramondre is playing on a team that is not great. So while Ramondre still has a lot of value, this game against Miami could be excellent. So while I think that Pittman and Ramondre will probably have good weeks this week, I don't really want to trade out of DK. If I'm trading out of DK, I kind of want to get a little bit more in return, Leonardo. But it really depends on your team, and it really depends on your situation at running back. If you need a running back, this is a trade that you could consider. But I think when Anthony Richardson comes back, Pittman's going to go back to having minimal to no value. So hopefully that helps you, Leonardo. My wide receiver tight ends currently are Jamar, DJ, Connor, Pollard, and my flex is Leggett, Ridley. I had Pacheco, and for context, this 14-man league, PPR. Any suggestions? So, SS, when we come and look at what you got here, you were offered this trade, Garrett Wilson, Swift, Pollard, and Lazard. Looking at your current roster right now, knowing that it's 14-man, we were just talking about 16-man league, Superflex. This is 0.5. DJ Moore definitely has some value. If it were me, I would move on from Calvin Ridley, especially in a 14-man league. Ridley probably still has a little bit of value, but in most 12-man to 10-man leagues, he's on the verge of being droppable. I think if it were me, and you already have Leggett there, and like I was arguing with Joe about, Leggett is definitely a flex play this week. Looks good enough. If I needed a wide receiver, and we can talk more about this tomorrow, we're going to be on from 3:45 to about 5 o'clock tomorrow. guys I would be looking at, maybe not this week because of the bye week, but I would try to be trading myself maybe into Ladd McConkey on the back end if I needed another bench piece. I'd also be considering trying to move into AJ Brown right now, SS. That's the guy that we're targeting, not Garrett Wilson. So if I were trading Pollard and Lazard, I'd want to be moving myself up a little bit, trying to go after AJ Brown. I'm also moving myself into Stephon Diggs. I'm also moving myself into Brian Thomas Jr. I'm also trying to move myself into Shakir and also trying to move myself into Jackson Smith. That's kind of where I'm at. Running backs are Pacheco, Kyron, and JT. Okay, yeah, so with that in mind, Leonardo, I think the trade is fair enough. I don't know if you'll be absolutely happy with it in the long term of the season, but you're needing a starter right now with JT being down and Pacheco being down. If you wanted to play and you didn't want to give up DK and you were looking for a waiver wire piece potentially for the week, Justice Hill is definitely a waiver wire piece that I'm looking at this week. Also, Roshan Johnson is worth picking up off the waiver wire, Leonardo. So if I'm talking about that, if you really think that Pittman has some long-term value, I think it's a fair enough return. But it's just a concern with Ramondre. Ramondre's a starter this week. He's going to do well this week, I think. But in the long term, I think you're hurting yourself a little bit more by trading away DK. Yeah, we did, SJ. We did answer that question. Joe and I said we would not trade. Yeah, I feel you, Leonardo. A lot of people had Rice go down. SJ, we did answer that question about Devontae Adams and DJ Moore. I wouldn't want to move into DJ Moore right now. I would start Bucky over White in terms of the Tampa Bay game. White's usage has been just dismal. But when it comes down to this Devontae Adams trade, Devontae Adams might get moved to another team. DJ Moore, especially knowing that his standard form, DJ Moore is not returning that value in terms of standard form right now. So PPR, I'd say, okay, I'd be fine getting him right now. But guys I'm looking at in terms of moving on from Devontae Adams, SJ, is if I'm moving out of Devontae Adams, I want to be trying to move myself into Mike Evans. I want to be moving myself into Stephon Diggs. I want to be trying to move myself into George Pickens. He has some great games coming up on the horizon. I want to be moving myself into Brian Thomas Jr. and players like that, SJ. So if I'm looking at this trade, I don't think I want DJ Moore. I'd rather hold on to Devontae, see what happens to him. So everybody, I do have to go. I have to use the bathroom, and then I have to go see my kid at home. But we'll be on tomorrow at 3:45 until about 5 o'clock. Join us again if you have any other questions. If you go to if you're like SJ, went to take a shower, come back, and you think of any questions, just let us know. Feel free to type some questions into the chat prior to the next episode, so we'll be sure to come in and answer your question. We answer every question that comes our way, so please make sure you stick tight and stay tuned. We'll be with you again. Local Football Flavor, we're out.